everybody. And here we go for this part 10. I'm not sure how long I'll be able to read this. Just checking the sound. It sounds way better than it did last time. So great. We will get to this real quick. All right. And just to start off, here, the Self-Realization Fellowship website, yogananda.org, where there's teaching, meditations, things about Paramahansa Yogananda, events, blog, donate, and this is also where you can purchase his book as well, which I just purchased a soft copy. I wish I had gotten the hard copy, to tell you the truth. But either way, let us continue with the reading here. So without further ado, we shall get started. Chapter 6, Permanent Shelter in Spirit Through Meditation. And I need to just keep an eye on the chat there. And here we go. Chapter 6, Permanent Shelter in Spirit Through Yoga Meditation. The true renunciation and true yoga depend on meditation. Verse 1. The Blessed Lord said, He is the true renunciant and also the true yogi who performs dutiful and spiritual actions, karyam and karma, without desiring their fruits, not he who performs no fire ceremony, nor he who abandons action. And fire ceremony is sacrifice. So, the commentary, quote, he is neither a sannyasi renunciant nor a yogi who is inactive, akriya, performing neither dutiful actions, karyam, nor meditative actions, karma. He is not a sannyasi or a renunciant who is a niragni, i.e., without the fire of renunciation, in whose sacrificial flames the true devotee burns all personal desires, lusts, like the dislikes, sorrows, and pleasures. Nor is he a yogi who is a niragni, i.e., without the inner sacrificial fire of meditation, kindled wisdom, in which the true yogi burns his desires and unites the fires of his concentration with the flame of God. Quote, the devotee is a yogi, one united to God, who emerges the soul's spark in the cosmic light of inner fire right of ecstatic meditation, and who acts his daily part in the divine drama just to please God. That same person is also a sannyasi renunciant by relinquishing personal desires while he conscientiously performs dutiful actions, unquote. This section is subtitled Definition of the True Renunciant, Sannyasi. The Gita in this verse, and in its several other references to sannyas or samnyasa, uses this word both in its general sense of quote-unquote renunciation, derived from its Sanskrit verb root meaning literally, quote, to cast aside, unquote, and is applicable in its specialized meaning as designating the monastic life of monks and nuns who have taken final vows of complete renunciation. The sannyasi, or man of renunciation, emphasizes the external conditions of the desirelessness and non-attachment in order to maintain the consciousness of God in his activities, and the yogi emphasizes the inner perception of God in meditation and ecstasy, which he then strives to carry into his daily actions. If a novitiate pursues the spiritual path principally by thinking only of God while performing spiritual activities, he is a sannyasi. If a truth seeker concentrates primarily on seeking God in meditation, he is a yogi. But that devotee who combines the two, thinking of God while working for him and also seeking him in deep meditation, is the one who quickly knows God. He is both a sannyasi and a yogi. Man, made in the divine image, has come on earth to play this role intelligently in the cosmic drama of destiny designed by God. His life is not man's own show. If he becomes personally and emotionally involved in the very complicated cosmic drama, he reaps inevitable suffering for having distorted the divine, quote-unquote, plot. To act with self-interest is to lose sight of the cosmic plan or will of God, thus upsetting the divine arrangements for man's speedy salvation. The egotist, and the materialist, busily planning for fulfillment of flesh desires, sankalpa, remain entangled in rebirths. The The selfishly ambitious man cannot get away from troubles and disillusionment. He is attached to his small family and excludes the world from his love. He fails to learn the sweet lessons of God, who has inspired us with the affection for relatives, that we may be able, like the true devotee, to love all men as our brothers. The egotist, thinking himself the doer of all actions, isolates himself from the divine. He is in fact opposing universal law, pitting his puny strength against truth. The devotee throws all responsibility for actions on the Lord. For him, it is ever God alone, quote unquote. Indeed. All right. This Gita stanza condemns idleness, which is often erroneously equated with desirelessness. Inactivity is a state that proves man to be identified with the lowest, tamas, or inertia, quality of the ego. The sluggard is worse than the man who is egotistically active. The apathetic individual turns away from God and material activities equally, thus degenerating physically, mentally, and spiritually. He who works with selfish desires is nevertheless developing his mind and body, or one of them, and is far superior to the supine shirker of all duties. This verse, therefore, clearly defines the path of yogis and renunciants, not as an escape into the wilderness, but as a life of dutiful and spiritual activity without personal attachment. This next subsection is called the nature of karyam, actions that are man's duty. The word karyam in this stanza signifies all dutiful actions of external value. The instinct for self-preservation, for instance, involves physical activities. That instinct has been implanted in each person by God and nature. The man who fulfills his duties towards the body with a personal interest, i.e., desires for fruits, remains bound to the wheel of rebirth, i.e., to the operations of karmic law. He escapes it when he performs all actions with the sole purpose of pleasing God, who alone is the true doer and bearer of burdens. Dutiful actions, specifically, are those that are due from each individual based on his current level of development and karmic involvement. In order for him to strip his consciousness of all evils of delusion, to reveal the radiant glories of his soul, and thus to reclaim his lost perfection as the reflection of the image of spirit. He who performs those bounden duties assigned to him by God without harboring selfish desires for the fruits of those actions is a sannyasi renunciant. Conversely, he who renounces dutiful actions simply because he has relinquished the desire to be beneficiary of the fruits of such actions is not a sannyasi. Good actions, such as an active interest in social service or other humanitarian work, that are performed with any motive in the conscious or subconscious minds other than the desire to please God, are considered to be actions done with longing for their fruit. No matter how noble the activity, if it diverts one from the supreme goal by its consequent karmic bondage, it does not belong to the category of the highest dutiful actions. The emphasis, therefore, is on renunciation, not necessarily of a life in the world, but of a selfish worldly life. Such renunciation does not involve loss, nor the flying away from dutiful activities, but lies in spiritualizing one's life. Very important. Every man should find and fulfill those actions that will harmoniously develop his material life, his body and his mind, and above all, the qualities of his heart and soul. All honest work is good work. It is capable of leading to self-development, provided the doer seeks to discover the inherent lessons and make the most of the potentialities for such growth. The question arises, how can a person discover his God-ordained duties? Spiritual tradition enjoins that the beginner in the path of yoga should ask his guru to advise him. A guru who knows God is able to determine a man's evolutionary status and rightful duties. If, for reasons of his own, or to respect the divine secrecy pervading the phenomenal world, the guru declines to give specific advice, the student, after deep meditation, should pray, quote, Lord, I will reason, I will act, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing I should do, unquote. By this method, the devotee with the guru's inner blessing is pushed to cultivate his own soul discrimination and thereby hasten his personal attunement with God. And I will say that I had said something like this myself many years ago, and it served me very well. Again, this is why I'm here talking to you guys and reading this book. Continuing, as the devotee progresses in meditation, he will find God directing his activities through his awakening intuition. Naturally, one also Naturally, one should also use common sense in deciding the righteous duties connected with the discipline of his own life and the lives of those dependent on him. Blameworthy is the performance of activities not chosen by discrimination. Such actions are like blindfolded horses, being led to unknown destinations by the ignorant self, as it asserts its prejudiced, egotistic whims and prepossessed ideas and habits. Such actions are like blindfolded horses being led to unknown destinations by the ignorant self, as it asserts it is prejudiced, egotistic whims, and prepossessed ideas and habits. Every man should perform the duties involved in finding God and also the worldly duties necessary to maintain himself and to help others. Regardless of heredity, environment, and evolutionary status, the highest and most important duty of every man is to establish his consciousness in unity with God. This next section is subtitled Meditation as a Form of Dutiful Action, Karma. The word karma in this stanza is used in one of its specialized meanings to denote meditative actions. The use of yoga techniques that scientifically withdraw the attention from the objective world and focus it on the inner being, which alone possesses the ability to experience and commune with God. The yogi is he who practices these techniques to attain union with God. A devotee in whom the ego is still strong becomes tied to the fruits of his actions and does not attain salvation. And just as an easy way of understanding being tied to the fruits of your actions, this is what pride is really all about, especially egotistical pride, right? Continuing, if a yogi practitioner's main object is meditating deeply, which should be solely to know God, is compromised by a desire to attain powers or become known as a great yogi, he may attract a host of admirers, but not the Lord. You see what I'm saying? He also is a sham yogi who sits lazily under a tree, passing his time in careless intellectual perusal of philosophy and in admiring the sense-soothing beauties of nature. Indolent religious mendicants like those who roam by the thousands in holy cities such as Benares are not yogis. Renunciation of dutiful and serviceful actions produce worthlessness, not holiness. It does nothing to root out impure sex thoughts and sensual impulses and anger and other violent inclinations secreted in the subconscious mind. The genuine yogi, by contrast, is he who meditates deeply and practices a yoga technique for divine union. His work and efforts in meditation are dutiful and proper actions, God ordained. A yogi who performs meditative actions for the attainment of God is not considered to be concentrating on the fruits of that activity. A true devotee does attain the Lord as the fruit of his actions. Nevertheless, because man's efforts to divine union ultimately result in liberation, such actions do not involve him in bondage, even though their fruit has indeed been desired. He who devotes himself solely to meditation to find God and towards that end abandons all other activities is a true man of renunciation, a sannyasi. He has renounced actions not because of idleness, but because of divine aspiration. And the same man is a yogi who, because he works hard to attain ecstasy and soul contact. But as it is nearly impossible to engage in meditation day and night unless one is already far advanced in ecstatic God communion, the earnest yogi also engages himself methodically in some kind of work that conduces to the welfare of others. The yogi may be either a novice striving for God communion or an adept who has already attained his blessedness. It is optional whether the yogi follows the path of outer renunciation or carries on a family life with inner non-attachment. But only a yogi who has achieved unbroken God realization in ultimate freedom, an ideal exemplar of which was the yoga avatar Lahiri Mayasaya, can in certainty remain completely detached in a married worldly life. Only a mind firmly established in God is impervious to dilution by a material environment. The spiritual advancement of a yogi without complete God attainment can hardly remain unattained in the worldly vibrations of a marital relationship. Such an expectation would be both contradictory and unnatural, but the monk also must face his nemesis. Though he remove himself from the environs of many temptations of the senses, his vows of celibacy and renouncement of worldly entanglements do not automatically confer victory over his inner sensory proclivities and inclinations. He may hide himself away from objects of temptation and yet find it very difficult to escape the haunting mental habits of yielding to the seduction of his desires, ever lurking to entrap him. The yogi who experiences in meditation the enticement of God's charm becomes convinced in his heart that God is far more tempting than material temptations. By such comparison, he spontaneously becomes a man of renunciation. Oh man, isn't that true? Thus, the path of yoga is superior to the path of renunciation, for the sincere desire and meditative effort to attain God communion, roused by even a little inner contact with God, are of paramount importance to any attempts at practicing renunciation. The yogi, who by meditation becomes also a man of renunciation, supremely engaged in seeking God contact and at the same time sloughing off sensory attachment, is a true yogi renunciant. Renunciants who take formal vows of sannyas by being made a swami by another swami who can trace his spiritual ancestry to the supreme guru of all swamis, Swami Shankara, and who are also yogis striving for God communion as the foremost object of their spiritual efforts, are yogi swamis. This section subtitled Monastic Ideal of the Yogi Swami, Complete Renunciation. Now this is of course his school, where he comes from. Yogi Swamis also embrace a higher ideal than aspiring yogi renunciants. True yogi Swamis are so enwrapped in love for God alone that they are not afraid to take the unconditional vow of complete renunciation, to live a life of celibacy and strict self-discipline of the senses and ego, a vow considered by worldly minds to be a grim challenge, if not wholly inconceivable. In commending wholehearted renunciation, Jesus addressed his disciples in these words, quote, "And every one that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life." Unquote. For myself, such complete renunciation as a monk of the Swami order was the only possible answer to the ardent desire in my heart to give my life wholly to God. Uncompromised by any worldly tie to me, anything less was to offer the beloved Lord a second place. When I expressed this resolute intent to my guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar, he adjured me, quote, "Remember that he who rejects the usual worldly duties can justify himself only by assuming some kind of responsibility for a much larger family," unquote. That's a very good point. His ageless wisdom might indeed have been echoes of Sri Krishna's words in the Gita. As a monk, my life has been offered in unreserved service to God and the spiritual awakening of the hearts with his message. For those on the path I have followed who also feel called to complete renunciation in a life of seeking and serving God through the yoga ideals of meditative and dutiful activities, I have perpetuated the monastic order of self-realization fellowship, the Yogoda Satsanga Society of India, the line of sannyas in the Shankara order, which I entered when I received the holy vows of a Swami from my guru. The organizational work that God and my guru and param gurus have started through me is carried on not by worldly hired employees, but by those who have dedicated their lives to the highest objectives of renunciation and love for God. This next section is called The Gita's Advice, Make the Heart a Hermitage of God. And let me just take a quick sip. For the aspiring devotee in the world and in the ashram, let me make sure this is not too high. For the aspiring devotee in the world and in the ashram, the call of the Bhagavad Gita is to make the heart a hermitage of God, wherein, as a renunciant, one strives for inner desirelessness and non-attachment, and as a yogi, one envelops himself in the meditative bliss of divine presence and then offers his actions in selfless service to share that presence with other seeking souls. All actions of the yogi sannyasi, whether karyam or karma, should be performed with a loving motive of pleasing God. He who does his duties haphazardly or carelessly, or who meditates without zest, cannot please the Lord nor win liberation. Any action, physical, mental, spiritual, performed with a desire for divine union as its fruit is not a quote-unquote selfish action. Instead, it is a perfect action in the sense that it fulfills the divine motive in creation. The purpose of God is to reveal himself to his children after they have been victorious in the tests of a dreadful delusion, Maya, in which he has designatedly cast them. He loves God best who acts rightly, according to the laws of true love, stated succinctly, if crudely, in the adage, quote, if you love me, love my dog, unquote. The yogi sannyasi, in his love for God, loves also the action which God has imposed on him. He performs his dutiful and meditative activities joyously, desirelessly, solely to please him who he loves. He indeed is the true ideal, yogi and sannyasi. Verse number 2, quote, understand, O Pandava Arjuna, that what is spoken of in the scriptures as a renunciation is the same as yoga, for he who has not renounced selfish motive, sankalpa, cannot be a yogi. Seems that I still have a strange scratchiness here. Oh well. On to the reading. The commentary continues as discussed. At length in the previous verse, the sannyasi or man of renunciation concentrates primarily on removing all material and mental obstructions, worldly ties, and selfish desires in order to realize God, whereas the yogi is primarily concerned with the use of a scientific yoga technique for self-realization. In a positive way, the yogi, tasting the superior bliss of the Lord, automatically renounces all lesser pleasures to embrace God alone. In a more negative way, the sannyasi renounces all material desires and wrong actions by discrimination to prepare himself for union with the infinite. Both paths lead to the same goal, but for both the sannyasi and the yogi, excuse me, such achievement requires not only outer mastery of one's actions, but also inner mental victory. Sankalpa, which is, quote, selfish motive, unquote, refers to in this verse, signifies inner planning or expectation of a desired result formed by the ego-guided mind. Renunciants and yogis are cautioned that though they may remain self-controlled or meditatively quiet outwardly, they may nevertheless be engaged inwardly in egotistical activities, inspired by the sensations and bodily urges that cause constant fluctuations in the consciousness. The mind ruminates on these impulses, which are either agreeable or disagreeable, and accordingly formulates results concerning them. Thus, yoga, or perfect evenness of consciousness, is precluded. Patanjali, in his Yoga Sutras, defines yoga as the dissolving of the scintillations, or vrittis, alternating waves of thoughts, desires, and emotions, in the chitta, or primordial feeling, i.e., in the heart, the totality of individualized consciousness, arising from the likes and dislikes produced from the contact of the mind with the senses. Yoga has also been defined in the scriptures as the forsaking of all desireful thoughts and as the attainment of the state of quote unquote thoughtlessness. These definitions fit the achievements of both the man of renunciation and the yogi. Real renunciation consists in the ability to dismiss thoughts and desires at will. Supreme yoga ecstasy bestows the quote unquote thoughtless state, but it is not a mental coma in which the mind is unconscious of external sensations and internal perceptions, but is a state of divine equilibrium. Its attainment proves that the yogi has entered the vibrationless being, the ever blissful, ever conscious divine void beyond phenomenal creation. No one can be a yogi, maintaining a state of mental equilibrium, free from inner involvement in planned desireful activities, unless he has renounced identification with his ego and his unsatisfiable lust. His unsatisfiable lust for the fruits of actions. Only he who has reached samadhi can be spoken of as no longer working for the ego. Yeah, it's one thing though, when you do have that experience, there's like no going back. When you really have that experience. Continuing, of course, if a devotee does not plan his activities according to a definite divine purpose, he will be stumbling at every step. The true yogi fills himself with God and intelligently performs all actions inspired by him. If, for example, he builds a hermitage for his disciples, he is not to be accused of planning with a selfish motive. The aim of all of his actions is to please God. He is not inert nor insensitive, but is one who works in the world, doing all activities for God. without personal desires about anything. He sees and appreciates God in all manifestations of goodness and beauty. A true yogi may admire a beautiful horse, for instance, but those who feel a wish to possess the animal become entangled in sankalpa, ego-instigated desires. He is a yogi who can remain in any material environment without being involved in likes and dislikes. When a yogi can remain completely free from personal desires during inner or outer activity, then he is a successful man of renunciation. And when a man of renunciation is able to renounce all outer and inner activities by an act of will and merge his consciousness in the perception of God, he is the same as a yogi who can remain immersed in God by ecstasy, dissolving by yoga all the scintillations of feelings. A perfect sannyasi and an accomplished yogi are thus the same, for by different paths they have attained yoga, God, union. Verse 3 and 4. Verse 3 is, for the Muni desiring ascension, meditative action, karma, for divine union is spoken of as quote, his way, unquote. When he has mastered this yoga, then inaction is said to be, quote, his way, unquote. Number 4, verse 4 says, he who has overcome attachment both to sense objects and to actions, and who is free from all ego-instigated plannings, that man is said to have attained firm union of soul with spirit. And this subsection is Yogaruda. This is the state of perfect equilibrium in spirit. For the aspiring Muni, the spiritual climber, who is advancing towards God union, his means for attaining the goal is the divine meditative actions of yoga techniques by which he withdraws his mind from the dreams of matter and dissolves it in God. When the yogi has attained his oneness, then the quiescence of unshakable union with God beyond the dream activities of delusive creation is thereafter the cause and the instrumentality of all functions of his transformed consciousness. Thus, the devotee climbs by action, karma, or sacrifice, or scientific yoga. Perfected in yoga, he attains in action the state of perfect equilibrium in spirit, yoga ruda. When the yogi has freed himself from the dream of matter by attaining the actionless state of samadhi, yoga ruda, he finds freedom also, 1, from all desires for sensory objects, and 2, from the selfish plannings, sankalpas, that accompany desire, and 3, from the delusion that he, and not God, is the performer of action. The devotee, desirous of dissolving his mind in God, concentrates his meditative activities on the practice of pranayama, or life control. The word karma in this stanza is used technically to signify these special techniques, such as Kriya Yoga, Kavali Pranayama, by which the life force can be withdrawn from the senses and concentrated in the 7 cerebral spinal centers. The coccygeal center has 4 rays, the sacral center has 6 rays, the lumbar center 10, the dorsal center 12 rays, the cervical center 16 rays. The medullary center, the quote, sharp two-edged sword, unquote, has 2 rays of current, positive and negative, that supply the 2 hands, the 2 feet, the 2 lungs, all dual branches of the nervous system, and the dual organs, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, 2 tongues, the tongue being forked or fibricated, i.e. divided into 2 sections, and the 2 hemisphere of the brain. The brain is a reservoir of cosmic current received through the medulla oblongata, the lowest or posterior part of the brain, tapering off into the spinal cord. The medulla is scripturally referred to as, quote, the mouth of God, unquote, or, quote, the door, unquote, and, quote, the holy opening, unquote. Cosmic energy enters the body through the medulla and then passes to the cerebrum, in which it is stored or concentrated. The brain is thus the major reservoir that sends current to the 6 other minor plexuses. These centers or subdynamos are busily engaged in remitting currents to the different nerve branches and to the various organs and cells of the body. Now, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this before, but I'm sure I mentioned it in the last reading in chapter 5. But just to reiterate, you know, when I first really had this kind of experience, it talks in the chapter 5. It talks about how the prana and apana have different feelings. Apana is a warm feeling, and prana is like kind of a cold feeling. And that's what happens to me when I really connect. Is like my entire body just it goes cold. Like all the hair stands up on my neck and everything like that. I've even had an experience where I was taking a hot shower and And that happened to me. And my entire body, I mean, my whole body was just, it's just cool, cool. Just, I mean, it was really an incredible kind of experience. But it's one of those things where, it's good to like know about these things, but don't overthink about it. And when it happens, again, it's like understanding that, like, when you go a certain distance in anything, whether it's education or running or whatever, there are signs that are like, oh, you've gone this far, you've done good, or whatever else, and we have to keep those kinds of things in mind and not to get overexcited or over emphasizing on those kinds of feelings. But just to say, in meditation, if you get into that spot and you start to feel that tingling, like I said in the last reading, in the back of where you're right here, where it just says the medulla connecting to your spine and your brainstem, like, that's absolutely something that I have experienced on, many, many, many occasions now. At first, it really blew my mind, but it's strange. Like, it happened to me on occasions where I didn't even expect it to, and those kind of times, like, it's like, wow, like, what's going on? But when you're in true meditation and it does happen to you, it's something else, because you're completely and utterly aware of everything that's going on, and it's extremely intense. I am still personally trying to grapple with the intensity. I can't hold on to it for very long, and my body also tends to go into these crazy convulsions. So I need to calm that down and start, so I can hold on to it a little bit longer, and go a little further with that. But just understand that, like, this stuff is, might seem like it's some crazy stuff, but that's the thing. People are never going to experience these things unless you do the work to actually try it. So, anyways, continuing with the commentary. The medullary center, with its two currents, positive and negative, supplies the whole body and creates the dual organs by condensing life force into electrons, protons, and atoms. Thoughttrons are vibrationally condensed into lifetrons into electrons and protons, which in turn condense into atoms. The atoms are transformed into cells, which combine into the different forms of muscular, osseous, and nerve tissues of the various body parts. The two currents in the medulla, therefore, do not only supply current to the five senses, but condense themselves by grosser vibrations in the actual bodily tissues. This next session is subtitled "Through Pranayama, the Astral Body and Chakras Become Visible." I haven't seen that yet, but in initial state, the yogi is busy withdrawing the life force into the spinal centers. When he succeeds in this work, his astral body with 7 astral plexuses becomes visible to him through his spherical astral eye of intuition. The astral body is made of tissues of light condensed from astral rays, even as the physical body is made of fleshly tissues. When the yogi is able to withdraw his life force from the senses, not only does he see his astral body, but he can disconnect his mind from the outer world. The benefit of seeing the astral body is the experience the experience helps the yogi to ascend, to lift his soul as the body identified ego from the fleshly prison. Afterward, the devotee learns how to take his ego out of the astral and ideational bodies and commingle it with the pure soul. The yogi is then able to unite his soul with the omnipresent, ever-blessed spirit. The devotee first learns how to unite his life force withdrawn from the senses into the 7 cerebral spinal centers, and after that to unite the lights of these astral plexuses into his astral body. Then he dissolves the astral body into cosmic energy and ideational body. Finally, he learns to dissolve cosmic energy in the ideational body into cosmic consciousness. These are the various complicated processes with which the aspirant busies himself, performing God and uniting yoga activities that enable him to dissolve his body consciousness into the infinite. His soul becomes expanded in the omnipresent Lord. The brain current is spoken of as having 1,000 rays. It is these rays that help to sustain the thousands of functions of the body cells. This next subsection is subtitled Cerebral Spinal Centers Described by Yogis of India and by St. John. The original 2 currents of the medulla are amplified into 1,000 currents of the cerebrum, which become specialized as the 16, 12, 10, 6, and 4 currents of the 5 spinal centers. The different plexuses perform specific functions of the body according to the number and nature of their currents. See commentary on chapter 1, verse 20 to 23. The 7 physical centers have 7 astral counterparts and 7 ideational counterparts. These 7 plexuses are spoken of by the yogis of India as 7 lotuses, and the currents or rays of these centers are described as the petals of the lotuses: 4-petaled, 6-petaled, 10-petaled, 12-petaled, 16-petaled, 2-petaled, and 1,000-petaled. The greatest disciple of Jesus Christ, John, refers to these 7 astral centers with the different rays as 7 golden candlesticks and 7 stars in 7 Eastern churches. The reader of, because Eastern is actually a cult for inner, and Western is an occult for the outer existence, just so you guys know. The reader of this Gita commentary may wonder why a yogi has to understand the complicated mechanisms of the physical, astral, and ideational bodies. A glance at a text like Gray's Anatomy, however, will show us the incredible ramified complications in the organization of even the physical body. The astral and ideational bodies, being more subtle, are more highly organized and complicated than is the physical body. Some comprehension of man's threefold anatomy reveals the science underlying yoga techniques and shows why and how they work. The conception of man's physical, astral, and ideational bodies can be more easily understood by the following explanation. God dreamed the entire creation in terms of ideas. Then he said, quote, "Let there be light," and there was light, unquote. He vibrated those ideas into dream lights, and out of them created a dream astral cosmos. Then he condensed the dream astral cosmos into a dream physical universe. After the macrocosmic universes were created, God made the microcosmic objects of creation. He created man as a composite of 3 dreams: a dream ideational body encased in a dream astral body within a dream physical body. The sages therefore say, the successful yogi has to withdraw his mind from the dream physical body, dream astral body, and dream ideational body, and dissolve those forms into the dream physical cosmos, dream astral cosmos, and dream ideational cosmos. When the yogi can dissolve the dream physical cosmos into the dream astral cosmos, and the dream astral cosmos into the dream ideational cosmos, and the multitudinous ideas of the ideational cosmos into the unified perception of cosmic consciousness, then he becomes free like the spirit. Pardon me while I drink. The Spirit has dreamed itself into the aspects of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, or Holy Ghost, which in India is Sat, Tat, and Om, into the dream ideational astral and physical universes, and into the dream ideational astral and physical bodies. Thus, the soul, as the image of God, has descended from the omnipresence of cosmic consciousness to the limitations of its earthly surrounding and of the 3 dream bodies. So the aspirant yogi must withdraw his consciousness from all dream illusions and finally unite his soul with the ever-existent, ever-conscious, ever-new bliss of spirit. In other words, the devotee must rise above all the microcosmic and macrocosmic dreams of God imposed upon him through the hypnosis of Maya, cosmic delusion, and thus rouse his soul from the experience of delusive dreams into the eternal wakefulness of spirit. This yogi has then attained quote-unquote inaction, or freedom from forced phenomenal participation. A devotee is called an aspirant and a spiritual climber when he tries to dissolve all dreams into the perception of the one spirit. When he is able to completely when he tries to dissolve all dreams when he is able to completely to dissolve all these quote-unquote suggestions or cosmic delusive dreams of Maya, he becomes anchored in the final reality. He is then spoken of as attaining Yogaruda, firm union of soul and spirit. All right, I need to take another sip here. Transforming the little self, ego, into the divine self, soul. Number 5, or verses 5 and 6. Excuse me. Apparently I needed some honey. Let man uplift the self, ego, by the self. Let the self not be self-degraded, cast down. Indeed, the self is its own friend, and the self is its own enemy. Verse 6, for him whose self, the ego, has been conquered by the self, the self is the friend of the self. But verily, the self behaves inimically as an enemy toward the self that is not subdued. That's a lot of selves. The commentary continues. The physical ego, the active consciousness in man, should uplift his body-identified self into unity with the soul, its true nature. It should not allow itself to remain mired in the lowly, delusive strata of the senses and material entanglement. The ego acts as its own best friend when, by meditation and the exercise of its innate soul qualities, it spiritualizes itself and ultimately restores its own true soul nature. Conversely, the physical ego serves as its own worst enemy when, by delusive material behavior, it eclipses its true nature as the ever-blessed soul. Indeed, when the physical ego, the active consciousness, has become spiritualized and united to the soul, it is able to keep the intelligence, mind, and senses under control, guided by the discriminative wisdom of the soul, i.e., the self, ego, i.e., the quote, self ego that has been conquered by the self, soul, unquote. Then the soul is the friend, the guide and benefactor of the active physical consciousness. But if the lower ego self has not been thus controlled and persists in keeping the consciousness matter bent, then the soul is the enemy of the ego. This follows the Gita allegory described in Chapter 1. Krishna, the soul, is the friend and guide of the spiritual endeavors of the devotee Arjuna, along with the Pandava army of divine qualities. Krishna, the soul, is therefore an enemy, an opposer, of Duryodhana's, Kaurava's army of materialistic inclinations, in which under the guidance of Bhishma, ego. Remember that. This is why this text in this commentary is so important. The soul, quote, inimical, unquote, to the ego, withholds its blessings of peace and lasting happiness, while the ego, behaving ignorantly as its own enemy, sets in motion the misery-making karmic forces of nature. Without the beneficence of the soul's protection in the world of Maya, the ego finds to its regret that its own actions against its true soul nature turn back on itself, like boomerangs, destroying each new illusion of happiness and attainment. Oh my God. Oh, that is so true in so many ways. I've experienced it in so many ways. So, all right, I think I can I'll pop that up a little bit, just checking the sound. And yep, that's better, I guess. Yep, okay. Going back to the reading. The soul, oh, sorry, I already read that. In the composition of these two concise verses, the word Atman, quote unquote, self, appears 12 times in an ambiguous construction, allowing for the interchange of meaning either as, quote, the soul, or, quote, the ego, the pseudo-soul. A classical example of the dichotomy so characteristic in Indian scripture, as shown in the above commentary, the clever interweavings of the words soul and ego in this instance consist of a singular thread of truth that runs through the whole fabric of the Gita. Let man be uplifted, not degraded. Let him transform his self, ego, into the self, soul. The self is the friend of the transformed self, but the enemy of the unregenerate self. And interestingly enough, that's exactly the entire purpose of the whole, quote, Course of Miracles book. Verse 7, quote, the tranquil age, victorious over the self, the ego, is ever fully established in the supreme self, spirit, whether he encounter cold or heat, pleasure or pain, praise or blame, unquote. Commentary elucidates spirit united in retaining his cosmic consciousness even in the domain of activity, the sage remains unperturbed by the oppositional states of the cosmic dream world. If thou canst transcend the body and perceive thyself as spirit, thou shalt be eternally blissful, free from all pain. The persevering yogi succeeds in metamorphosing his physical ego into the true soul. By further spiritual advancement, he realizes his soul as the reflection of the omnipresent spirit. When this state of realization is reached, the soul permanently perceives the Supreme Self or God. The perfected sage works through his transformed ego in the world, never losing sight of the divine face behind the Janus mask of nature. Interesting way of putting that. How this section is titled How the Sage of Self-Realization Views the World. Verse 8, quote, that yogi who is gladly absorbed in truth and self-realization is said to be I can't say this word. Indissolubly united to spirit. I said it. Unchangeable conqueror of his senses, he looks with an equal eye on earth, stone, and gold. Indeed. The commentary goes on. A yogi who has realized his soul by ecstasy and found it in all wisdom is filled with true satisfaction. He rests in bliss. Concentrated on the single divine beam, he looks upon a lump of earth, a stone, or gold as dream relativities of that same one light of God. The ordinary man considers solids and liquids and the energy manifestations of the material world to be vastly different, but the yogi sees them as various vibrations of the one cosmic light. To him, a lump of earth, a stone, and gold are merely substances that vibrate at different rates at atomic forms in a cosmic dream. Always uniting with the Lord, he realizes the phenomenal world and its various appearances as emanations from the one divine consciousness. Verse 9. Quote, he is a supreme yogi who regards with equal mindedness all men, patrons, friends, enemies, strangers, mediators, hateful beings, relatives, and the virtuous and the ungodly. Unquote. The commentary continues. In the previous stanza, the perfected yogi is said to perceive all forms of material creation and props in the dream drama as dream manifestations of one cosmic consciousness. In this stanza, the Bhagavad Gita defines a great yogi as he who similarly regards all human beings, friends and enemies, saints and sinners alike, as dream images made by the one consciousness of God. The ordinary man, watching the drama of good and bad human beings playing on the space screen of the world, is affected pleasurably and painfully. But the man who has perceived God looks upon all types of men as dream motion picture images, made of the relativities of the light of cosmic consciousness and the shadows of delusion. The exalted yogi, however, does not treat gold and earth and saint and sinner with impartial indifference. He wisely recognizes their dramatic differences on the mundane plane as perceived by other material beings. Even though all beings and objects in the cosmos are made of the divine light and the shadows of delusion, the yogi recognizes relative values. He endorses the activities of the virtuous who serve as harbingers of good to their fellow men, and he denounces the activities of the evil who harm themselves and others. This next section is called Krishna's Advice for Successful Practice of Yoga. Verse 10. Free from ever-hoping desires and from cravings for possessions with the heart, waves of feeling, controlled by the soul, by yoga concentration, retiring alone to a quiet place, the yogi should constantly try to unite with the soul. Unquote. And the commentary goes on. He who knows that his soul is divorced from God, body bound by the mental waves of feeling, longs to return to Spirit's omnipresence. Stanzas 10 to 14 give many wonderful pointers to help the devotee attain his goal. The aspirant who meditates without eliminating desires and hopes, instigators for actions of sensory enjoyment and possession, finds his mind roaming into the realm of materiality, planning for and visualizing various gains. So when the yogi starts to meditate, he must leave behind all sensory thoughts and all longings for possessions by quieting the waves of feeling, which is chitta, again, feelings of the heart. The mental restlessness that arises therefrom through the application of technique that reinstate the controlling power of untrammeled superconsciousness of the soul. This next section is subtitled, quote, a quiet place, unquote, disconnecting the mind from the sensory world. The devotee should choose for his meditation a quiet place. Noise is distracting. Only a yogi who can go into ecstasy at will can meditate in both quiet and noisy places. The devotee should begin his meditation with the practice of the techniques of Kriya Yoga, by which he can disconnect his mind from the outer sensory world. Many non meditating individuals think that it is impossible to do this, not realizing that they accomplish the feat every night in sleep. When the body is relaxed for slumber, the life force begins to withdraw itself from the muscles, motor nerves, and from the sensory nerves. At this juncture, the mind is disconnected from all sensations and becomes concentrated in the joy of subconscious rest. The state of sleep does not involve a total unconsciousness, because on waking, a man realizes the nature of his sleep, whether it was light or deep, unpleasant or pleasant. Kriya Yoga teaches one to go consciously into the state of sense disconnection without entering the eclipsing shadows of sleep. Krishna and Babaji, knowing the science behind the psychological and physiological processes involved in sleep, devised the special form of that science known as Kriya Yoga, by which the spiritual aspirant can pass at will beyond the threshold of the less joyous subliminal state of subconscious slumber into the blissful superconsciousness. The ordinary devotee tries ineffectually, because unscientifically, to put his mind on God. The mind that is tied to material sensations through the actions of life force flowing in the five senses, sense telephones. But the Kriya Yogi works scientifically to withdraw his mind from the senses by the technique of switching off the life force from the telephonic nerves. Withdrawing both the mind and the life force from the senses, the yogi unites them with the light and bliss of the soul, and eventually with the cosmic light and cosmic bliss of the spirit. In addition to solitary meditation, where the devotee cherishes his exclusive communion with God, a restless devotee will find it beneficial to meditate with other sincere souls, and especially with advanced yogis. The invisible vibrations emanating from the soul of a yogi will greatly help the beginner to attain inner tranquility. Jesus said, quote, "For where two or three are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them," unquote. Conversely, it is spiritually disturbing to a habitually restless devotee when he tries to meditate with someone even more restless than himself. Unless persons meditating together are making a sincere effort to cultivate devotion and meditative self-control of body and mind, a negligent meditator not only makes no progress himself, but is a negative distraction to others who themselves are having difficulty trying to go deep within. Careless indifference and bodily restlessness in meditation cause negative vibrations. Sincere spiritual effort, regardless of inner struggle, sends forth positive spiritual vibrations. The ecstatic meditation of the advanced yogi in deep communion with God radiates supernal blessings of God's presence. Deeply meditating disciples should concentrate on their guru, or meditate with him if possible. Those who are spiritually advanced do in fact meditate with the guru by visualizing him in the spiritual eye and tuning in with him. Whether or not they are in his physical presence, during meditation the spiritual vibration of a great master silently works on lesser yogis who may be meditating with him or who are in tune with him, regardless of distance. It is sufficient for a disciple to think strongly of his guru before meditation. He will then find his meditation on God to be reinforced by the Lord's power flowing through the direct, tangible channel of the guru. And this is subtitled Deeper Meaning of Solitude, Absorption in the Spiritual Eye. The student of metaphysics should understand this stanza in a deeper sense. It is here said that the yogi should remain in solitude and continuously meditate on his soul. The real state of solitude is attained when the yogi can switch off his life force from the senses and keep his mind concentrated not on the five centers of the spine, but at the single spiritual spherical eye. Through this eye he can perceive omnipresence and forget the body consciousness, which is produced by the action of the earthly current at the coccygeal center, the water current at the sacral, the fire current at the lumbar, the life force or air current at the dorsal, the etheric current at the cervical. A yogi attains the perfect state of solitude when he can rest in the superconscious bliss of the soul that exists beyond the subconscious state of sleep. In deep sleep, no disturbance of the senses can easily reach the mind. When the yogi, however, is concentrated at the spiritual eye in ineffable joy, he is really in the solitude that none of the senses has power to invade. Verse 11. quote, the yogi's seat in a clean place should be firm, not wobbly, neither too high nor too low, and covered first with kusha grass, then with a deer or tiger skin, then with a cloth, unquote. Those were some pretty detailed instructions. The commentary continues. The Indian yogi uses kusha grass to protect his body against the dampness of the earth. The skin and the cloth placed on top on which the devotee sits helps to insulate his body against the pull of the earth currents. During meditation, the mind tries to withdraw the searchlights of life force from the senses of the soul. During this process, the yogi who meditates with his body insulated avoids the tug of war between the upward flow of the life force through the nerves and the downward pull of the earth currents. In the modern world, in both East and West, neither kusha grass nor animal skin is necessary for the meditation seat. In India, it was customary for a forest dwelling yogi to make his seat on the skin of a tiger or leopard or deer that had died a natural death. A very satisfactory substitute is a seat made of a folded woolen blanket with a silk cloth placed over it. Silk repels certain earth currents better than does cotton. And isn't it interesting too? Yeah, like the tug of war between the upward flow of life force through the nerves and the downward pull of earth currents. Very reminiscent of something like Jacob's ladder, and the angels going up and down. Just saying, the seat should not be quote unquote too low, too near the earth, nor too high. The yogi should be careful not to perch on a small, high place from which during ecstasy he could fall down. Ah, well, there, that makes sense. Neither should he meditate inside an unventilated cave or closet, where there is insufficient fresh air, or in any place where the air is stale and suffocating. Nor should he place himself on the unstable seat, such as a wobbly or odd spring mattress, whose unevenness or squeaks might disturb his concentration. I.e., you want to make this as comfortable and as quiet as possible. The yogi should meditate on a firm seat, one that is clean, untainted by dirt or unspiritual vibrations of others. The thought of or life force emanating from an individual saturates the object he uses and his dwelling. Indeed. Sensitive persons can feel the inharmonious vibrations in a house where wickedness has reigned. A saint or other receptive persons can feel the spiritual vibrations left by masters in the places where they meditated. A devotee meditating where a sage has meditated, even if the sage has long since passed away from this earth, by deep mental attunement can feel his vibrations. Devout men who go on a pilgrimage and meditate in a place hallowed by the ecstasy of a master receive definite spiritual benefit. The kusha grass grows abundantly in India. It is rather prickly, but has special properties that repel the earth's dampness. Its use wasn't advocated in India because it is easily obtainable. The modern yogi, however, can make a good seat by placing a soft woolen blanket, not scratchy, covered by a silk cloth on a comfortable cushion or a spring pad on the floor, or on a spring mattress, one that doesn't sag, on a firm bed. If the beginner yogi sits on the hard floor to meditate, he will find his legs going to sleep, owing to pressure on his flesh and arteries. If he sits on a blanket over a spring pad or mattress on the floor or over a hard bed, he will not experience discomfort in his legs. So, they even have things called like samadhi chairs, for instance, that just bring your seat high enough off the ground to where your legs and everything else aren't going to have that kind of problem. But generally, I like a good thick pillow or something like that. Something that's like a thick, hard kind of pillow, not something too soft. Something that's nice and hard. That brings you 6 inches up off the ground is usually good for me, at least. But yeah, you definitely have to put something on underneath your seat to bring you up off the ground. That makes the biggest difference. Where was I? A Westerner used to sitting on chairs with his thighs at a right angle to his torso will find it more comfortable to meditate on a chair with a wooden blanket and silk cloth under him. Extending under, well, there you go. For those of you who can't sit cross-legged, extending under his feet, which rest on the floor. Those Western yogis, especially youths who can squat on the floor like Orientals, will find their knees pliable. Owing to their ability to fold their legs in an acute angle, such yogis may meditate in the lotus posture or in the more simple cross-legged position. No one should try to meditate in the lotus posture unless he is at ease in that position. Yeah, it's a tough position. To meditate in a strained posture keeps the mind on the discomfort of the body. Meditation should ordinarily be practiced in a sitting position. Obviously, in a standing posture, unless one is advanced, he may fall down when the mind becomes interiorized. It's true, you totally lose all kind of sense of your whole body. So it's really important that you're in a stable spot. Neither should the yogi meditate lying down, for he might resort to the, quote, practiced state of slumber. Indeed. I mistakenly told somebody to, if they can't do that, then just do it laying down, and that's exactly what happened. Continuing, excuse me. The proper bodily posture, one which produces calmness in body and mind, is necessary to help the yogi shift his mind from matter to spirit. This point is further detailed in verse 13. The subtitle to this section is called Symbolic Meaning, Ascending Earth, Water, and Fire Centers in the Spine, and is a very subtle. There is a very subtle metaphysical interpretation about the use of kusha grass next to the earth, the animal skin, and the silken cloth on top. The kusha grass growing on the earth signifies the earth center or earth current, lodged in the coccygeal center in the spine. The animal skin, which has been made from the nutrients of blood, is the symbol of liquid or the water current in the sacral center. The silken or fire manufactured cloth represents the fire current in the lumbar center. The successful yogi first takes his ego, mind, and life force through these three lower centers that are connected with material consciousness and lodges his consciousness in the centrally located, quote, neither high nor low, unquote, heart center. When the yogi is able to do that, when he finds the mind and life force ordinarily directed towards the senses and material objects through the three lower centers, turned upward to the heart center, he has reached the threshold of ascension. The best way to accomplish this feat is by Kriya Yoga. The uninitiated can begin by sitting in a straight position and drawing in breath with deep concentration, imagining it and the life current and mind to be flowing through the three lower centers up into the heart center. The yogi should expel breath and remain breathless as long as comfortably possible when his mind reaches the heart center. By performing this technique with deep concentration, the devotee can feel his breath, life force, and mind flowing into the heart center, and from there on to higher centers. Verse 12, quote, established on that seat, concentrating the mind on one point and controlling the activities of the fanciful faculty, chitta, feeling the power that visualizes, and the senses, let him practice yoga for self-purification, unquote. The ordinary person's mind is restless and undisciplined. By meditation, once in a while he is able to concentrate on one object at a time, such as the cosmic sound Om, which can be heard by a special yogic technique. Mind passes along with the life current from the brain through the spinal centers and then into the many branches of the nervous system and the innumerable cellular points of perception. The ordinary mind is therefore spoken of as being concentrated on many points of the flesh. It is entangled principally in sensations and in sensory tracts. The mind and life force engaged in looking at duality through the two eyes, listening through the two ears, smelling through the two nostrils, tasting through the forked tongue, and touching through many points of the skin are thus dissipated in myriads of perceptions. Man becomes matter-bound, torn by countless distractions. When the Kriya Yogi withdraws his mind and life force and gathers them together to be concentrated at one point in the single eye, he begins to look into the omnipresent sphere of the infinite. This is what is meant by making the mind one-pointed, the, quote, single-eyed, unquote, vision referred to by Christ. When the yogi meditates more deeply, he finds his mind automatically concentrated at the one point of the spiritual eye, in ecstasy with the Lord. In the beginning, the devotee, by meditation, succeeds once in a while in quieting the mind. By deeper progress, he finds that half the time his mind is concentrated on the divine, and half the time scattered in bodily and material perceptions. By further spiritual development, he remains in a state of continuous and one-pointed concentration, very seldom experiencing restlessness. In the final or niruddha state, his consciousness fully liberated from body identification and ascended into spirit, the yogi becomes permanently one with the Absolute. In this stanza, the Gita points out that during the effort of being one-pointed, the yogi will be unsuccessful unless he can by concentration withdraw his attention mind or manas from the activities of the life force in the various senses. Otherwise, he will be constantly distracted by restless thoughts, the mental concepts formed from the sensory stimuli by the, quote, fanciful faculty, unquote, of feeling, chitta. The devotee who sits in a good posture and meditates at the point between the eyebrows learns to practice yoga, the uniting of ego and soul. In deep concentration, he finds his mind and heart, chitta, feeling, free from sensory distractions and emotional likes and dislikes. With the emergence of the ego into the taintless soul, he engages in the ultimate, quote, self-purification, unquote. Verse 13. Quote, firmly holding the spine, neck, and head erect and motionless, let the yogi focus his eyes at the starting place of the nose, the spot between the two eyebrows. Let him not gaze around in various directions. A majority of Gita translators and commentators have misinterpreted the word nasikagram to mean, quote, tip of the nose, unquote. The word literally means origin of the nose. The origin or starting place of the nose is the spot between the two eyebrows, the seat of spiritual vision. In stanza 13, the yogi is rightly directed to concentrate on this visual spot, this vital spot, not the tip of the nose. Can you imagine that? Meditating through the tip of your nose. My guru, Sri Yukswar, noticing how frequently Nasikagram is misunderstood, once said drolly, quote, the path of a yogi is singular enough as it is. Why counsel him that he must also make himself cross-eyed? Unquote. That's a good point. The Sanskrit word used in this verse is reference to an erect spine as is kaya, literally, quote, the body, unquote, or the, quote, trunk of the tree, unquote. In chapter 15, verse 1, the body is described as the tree of life with roots above and branches below. The spine is the trunk, the physical nervous system and the channels of astral life forces, its branches. The brain and cosmic consciousness with the cerebral centers of the medulla, spiritual eye, and thousand-petaled lotus are its roots, its source of life and vitality. It really makes you wonder what the tree of life and the Genesis was really all about too, right? So this subsection is called Details of Correct Meditation Posture. And this is all great for you guys. I mean, this is direct, you know, methods of meditation of those of you who have been asking for it. At least it's here. Meditation involves the withdrawal through the spine of life current from the sensory nerve branches and the concentration of that accumulation of life force within the spherical spiritual eye. A straight spine and erectness of the neck and head are important in effective meditation. If one adopts an improper posture, his body bent or his chin tilted up or down, his crooked vertebrae pinched the spinal nerves. This pressure obstructs the reverse flow of mind and life force from the sensory channels to the brain. There is then no reinforcement of the power of the inner telescopic eye to perceive omnipresence. One should sit in a comfortable posture with the spine erect. The lumbar region of the spine, opposite the navel, should be gently crooked forward, the chest up and shoulders back, which places the inner edges of the shoulder blades closer together. Each hand, palm upturned, should be put on the corresponding thigh at the juncture of the thigh and the abdomen. Let me go back. Each hand, palm upturned, should be put on the corresponding thigh at the juncture of the thigh and abdomen to prevent the body from bending forward. The chin should be parallel to the floor. While maintaining this correct position, undue tension in the muscles should be relaxed. When the yogi holds the spine in the form of a bow by the above-mentioned posture, he is ready successfully to engage his reversed mind and life force in a battle with the outward pulling senses. Without any strictures or pinching of the spinal nerves, the mind and life force are easily directed upward by the yogi. This subsection is called Key to Meditation, concentrating at point between the eyebrows. As one switch pours through two channels, one electric current into two headlights of an automobile, so the one medullary astral eye of light supplies the two human eyes with two lights of forked light. This gives the delusive dual and dimensional perception of matter. Thus focused outwardly, the eyes are ordinarily constantly oscillating. The ego directs the two optic searchlights into various angles according to its psychological inclinations. Under the influence of specific stimuli and emotions, the eyes assume different positions and angles. Anger, jealousy, hate, love, determination all change the angle of vision and the appearance of the eyelids and eyeballs. The thoughts roused by the stimuli keep rotating the searchlight eyes, playing them in various directions to perform a variety of mental and physical activities. In this sense conscious state, the eyes are rarely still and concentrated. Yet even in the most restless man, when his thoughts are singularly concentrated, his eyes become still and begin to have one angle of vision. In the concentrated state of superconsciousness, that angle of vision is at the point between the eyebrows, the natural seat of will and concentration and of divine perception in the body. The aspirant who wants to produce the superconscious state, characterized by the conscious relaxation of life energy from the senses, must learn to fix his eyes and their gaze at this center. When the gaze of the two eyes is concentrated at the point between the eyebrows, the dual currents flowing from the medulla into the two eyes reunite. The yogi sees at this center the spiritual eye of three colors, a reflection of the actual luminous eye in the medulla oblongata. The illumination of the spiritual eye by this reversal of life force in the two eyes exerts a strong pull on the life force throughout the body. The senses, which were projected outside to cognize matter, are recalled within to concentrate on the source from which all the powers of the senses and mind flow. This Gita stanza therefore advises the devotee of the necessity of concentrating the light of the two eyes at the point between the two eyebrows, at the origin of the nose, as a prime requisite of yoga meditation. The single eye of light reflected in the forehead from the medulla is the astral eye of intuition, omnipresent perception. When the light of the two eyes is concentrated between the eyebrows as a single reinforced light, the yogi can see his body as made of light that emanates from God. The soul uses the spherical astral eye of intuition to perceive cosmic light and cosmic consciousness. Ooh, it's getting dark out there. I'm going to have to put my birds away soon. Continuing, subsection is concentrating at point between the eyebrows, yogi perceives the spiritual eye. Whereas the characteristic of the physical eyes is to perceive creation or matter by looking at one thing at a time, by shifting the gaze, or by looking at several points at the same time, the nature of the spherical eye is to behold all matter, all energy, and all consciousness simultaneously. Man, made in the image of God, has in his forehead the Lord's all-seeing power. Christ referred to as following to the omniscient eye of God, quote, "Are not two sparrows sold for a farthing, and one of them shall not fall on the ground without the sight of your Father," unquote. Jesus, lifting up his eyes and looking through his single omnipresent eye, ever found himself at one with the cosmic consciousness of the Father, the Lord who simultaneously perceives all the material universes, and all the astral universes, and all the ideational universes. The ordinary man, concentrating his vision with half-closed eyes at the point between the eyebrows, feels eye strain in the beginning, owing to unfamiliar practice. Absolutely. This is true. The yogi, on the other hand, used to concentrating upward on his spiritual eye, finds it distasteful to identify his consciousness with the downward material vision of his two physical eyes. Concentrating on the point between the two eyebrows during meditation helps the devotee to keep his eyes neither fully closed nor fully open. This practice prevents the onrush of either subconscious slumber or complete conscious wakefulness. Thus, the meditating yogi learns to penetrate into the subconscious sphere existing between the subconscious darkness above and the visible light below. So, interesting. You don't quite close your eyes all the way. The dividing line between the upper darkness and the lower material light of the half-closed and half-opened eyes is called the, quote, "the horizon of superconsciousness," unquote. A person meditating with closed eyes may fall asleep. Trying to meditate with open eyes, he may be thwarted by the stubborn visions of matter. That is why the yogi is advised to avoid the total darkness of closed eyes and the full light of opened eyes. Instead, he concentrates his vision on the superconscious horizon. If a person deeply concentrates on this horizon at the point between the eyebrows where darkness and light meet without straining the eyes, he refocuses the two currents in the two eyes into the original single current, and gradually learns to penetrate through the spiritual eye into the superconscious beatitude. In this way, the mortal habit of dual frontal vision or perceiving dimensional matter is changed into the spherical vision or intuitive perception of the one omnipresence. In spite of any mild discomfort or the unaccustomed positioning of the eyes, the yogi beginner should gently and calmly concentrate his vision at the point between the eyebrows, holding the gaze steady, not looking around, or permitting any restless movement of the eyeballs or flickering of the eyelids. In time, he will see the spherical spiritual eye. The presence of a concentration of the light of life force in the eyes is evidenced by the fact that even a gentle pressure of the eyeballs, by the fingers pressed gently and rotating over the eyelids of the closed eyes, will cause the emission of light in the darkness of the closed eyes. That's true. Many think that this is pressure-induced light is just physical. This is not the case. This light, seen only by the consciousness, is not grossly physical. It is rather a semi-physical and semi-spiritual manifestation of the life energy that builds, guides, and enlivens all bodily tissues. Fascinating. So I'm going to have to take a break here because my poor chickens need to be safely put away. So I am going to put the break screen up and throw on a little music while I do that, use the bathroom, top off my drink, and also it should be about 5 to 10 minutes or so. I'll be back, and I should be here for at least another hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. See you soon. Okay, I think we're back. And let me just double check here the sound. Oh, it's scratchiness. I don't know what the deal is with that. Yeah. I guess if I turn it down, it's not too bad. You guys can still hear me good. Okay, so back to the reading. Oh, it's still scratchy. Terrible. I'm gonna get a new mic this week. So, the subtitle of this section is Degrees of Perception of the Light of the Spiritual Eye. Seeing the inner light by yoga concentration methods of fixing the gaze, attention, and devotion instead of by physical pressure refines this semi-spiritual manifestation, changing it to the finer vibratory rate of its pure spiritual nature. Pardon me. There you go. Hence, the quality of the semi-spiritual light seen by gently pressing the eyes is enhanced with an increase in the depths of the devotee's meditation. Then deep meditation, when one's eyes and gaze are fixed in between the eyebrows, the life energy pouring from behind the wall of elusive man-made darkness through the sluice gates of two eyes floods the center of will in the forehead as a mass of brilliant energy, a bubbling lake of white light. This light may be changed into colors or shapes of infinite variety. The different rates of thought vibrations of the meditating devotee produce the variations. The common first fruit of concentration is white light. Expressions of devotion, love, wisdom all produce different variations. But when the devotee is established in the intensive, desireless, calm, intuitive state of meditation, then all variations of the light in the spiritual eye begin to change into the one true spiritual eye. When the yogi concentrates long enough with the half-opened eyes at the point between the eyebrows, and when the gaze is without any restless motion, he will be able to see a steady light surrounded by other, but flickering lights. He should not be diverted by this glimmering halo of the spiritual eye, but should steadfastly look at the center of the eye until he feels his mind completely absorbed within it. In time, he will see the perfect formation of the spiritual eye, a dark opal blue globe within a quivering ring of flame. Gradually, by deep concentration, an extremely brilliant white star occasionally glimmers in the center of the blue. The star is the gateway through which the consciousness must pass to attain oneness with spirit. It requires time and calm practice to steady the light of the intuitive astral eye. It takes deeper and longer practice to see the star. It requires greater realization to hold the perception of the star, and it takes mastery in meditation to march the consciousness valiantly triumphant through the starry gate of light. I certainly have not gotten to that point. This next section is subtitled Penetrating the Spiritual Eye. Yogi reaches progressively higher states. After the devotee is able at will to see his astral eye of light and intuition with either closed or open eyes and to hold it steady indefinitely, he will eventually attain the power to look through it into eternity. And through the starry gateway, he will sail into omnipresence. Progression through the spiritual eye, experienced by advanced yogis, unfold. First, the wondrous perceptions of superconsciousness, the region of rays of light out of which all matter evolves. The creative cosmic rays hide like veils the presence of the immanent universal Christ or Krishna consciousness, the Lord omnipresent in creation. By deeper concentration and meditation, the spiritual eye of intuition opens, and through the wisdom star, the yogi becomes united with the Christ Krishna omnipresence. And thence, in deepest ecstasy, he reaches the cosmic consciousness of spirit. Another instruction can be added in this connection. The astral eye of light can most easily be seen at night or in a dark room. The highly developed yogi, however, can see the spiritual eye even in daylight or in the presence of any strong light. Just as a drowsy man can sleep in the day or night, so the advanced yogi can see the spiritual eye and go into ecstasy at will, irrespective of the presence of darkness or of any kind of light. He learns to penetrate his consciousness in the astral eye and absorbing his whole being therein. He looks into the realm of spirit, remaining there, oblivious of the material world. Ordinary individuals who yearn to get rid of the obnoxious trials of consciousness of the conscious life cannot go at will to the subconscious state of restless sleep or to the blissful superconscious state, owing to the habits of worry and to lack of control of the life currents in the eyes and the vision and in the mind behind them. But the yogi learns by closing the eyes and relaxing the gaze to sleep at will. By keeping them open, gazing straight ahead, he learns to remain awake indefinitely. Holding his eyes half open and half closed and concentrating at the spiritual eye, the devotee can at will, and for as long as he chooses, enter and remain in a state of superconscious ecstasy. Thus, just by opening or closing his eyes or keeping them half open, the advanced yogi can transfer his concentration at will from the physical world to the subconscious slumberland or to the superconscious state. Summoning or dismissing these states at will, he becomes master of the conscious, subconscious, and superconscious worlds. As the devotee progresses in meditation from restless consciousness to cosmic consciousness, his conscious and subconscious thoughts may materialize in his inner vision, weaving figures of light, like those seen in movies, both real and unreal, materializations of the will and life energy. Beware, young devotee, of these fairies of the world of life energy. Be not satisfied with anything less than spirit and the bliss of spirit. Pay no attention to the variations of the inner light, but practice concentration on the light of the spiritual eye. The light of the eye must be used only to look for God, the one whose presence is hidden on the throne of light. Verse 14. With serenity and fearlessness, with steadfastness in brahmacharya and the mind and excuse me, with the mind controlled, with the thoughts centered on me, Krishna or Christ consciousness, the yogi should sit meditating on me as the final goal. He who is and this is the commentary, he who is steadfast in brahmacharya is defined as a celibate student who is faithful and living a holy life, engaging in sacred study and self-discipline. In the prescribed Vedic plan, this was basically the beginning of the spiritual life for all aspirants. Brahmachari vrate, quote unquote, has also a deeper meaning here. Literally, quote, one whose sphere of action or act of devotion, vrata, is practicing Om, and that is Brahma, the sacred sound, Shabda Brahma, unquote. The accomplished brahmachari, then, is one who, by the practice of meditating on Om, roams or progresses in the realm of Brahman, manifested as the creator or holy vibration, the Om, Amen, or Holy Ghost. God manifests in creation as the cosmic vibration, which expresses itself as cosmic sound and cosmic light. The cosmic sound, or Om, is the synthesis of all the sounds of the highly vibrating life forces, lifetrons, electrons, protons, and atoms. By listening to Om, the yogi becomes a true brahmachari, or one who is attuned to Brahman. By deep concentration, the devotee can hear Om at any time and in any place. The subsection is called Om, spoken of in Bible as quote-unquote the Word or Holy Ghost. The cosmic sound is spoken of in the Christian Bible as follows, quote, in the beginning as was the Word, and the Word was God, and was with God, and the Word was God, unquote. The word Om came from God. He manifests as the cosmic vibration in creation. The Bible also refers to the world as the Holy Ghost, or intelligent, ghost-like, unseen vibration that is the creator of all forms of matter. It is called Holy Ghost because this invisible force is guided by the Christ intelligence that exists in creation as the reflection, or, quote, soul-begotten Son, unquote, of the transcendental God, the Father. Jesus Christ promised that the Holy Ghost, or Great Comforter, would come to his disciples after his bodily departure from earth. Kriya Yoga is a fulfillment of that blessed promise of Christ, as it gives the peoples of the world a scientific technique for contacting the holy sound. Excuse me. St. John spoke of the cosmic sound, quote, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet, unquote, i.e., quote, I was in spiritual ecstasy with the Lord and heard behind my conscious, subconscious, and superconscious minds a voice like that of a great trumpet, the great commingling cosmic sound coming from the thrum, quote unquote, of lifetrons, protons, electrons, and atoms. A little bit like the Schumann resonance, if you think about it. Apparently my cat needs to go outside. I will be back in 30 seconds. All right. Not even 30 seconds. Okay. The subtitles of this is Patanjali's instruction for communion with Om. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Om or Om is spoken of as the symbol of Ishvara or God. The great authority on yoga refers to Om as a cosmic sound continuously flowing in the ether, unutterable by any human voice, and fully known only to the illuminated. Further, Patanjali says that deep concentration on Om is a means of liberation. Many people who do not understand the inward meaning of the scriptures think that by softly or loudly chanting Aum they can reach the superconsciousness. The Hindu scriptures, however, point out that one whose mind is identified with the kaya or body cannot possibly perceive the true Aum sound. In ancient times, only the knowers of Brahman were allowed to utter Aum because they were able to at will hear the cosmic sound and perceive behind it the presence of God. Okay, yep. A literal interpretation of this injunction led to the nonsensical belief that only Brahmins, no one of lower castes, or those who take sannyas and thereby have renounced all castes, should chant or meditate on Om. In point of fact, none can escape a constant communion with Om, for it pervades the consciousness in every fiber and atom of every being. Those who become consciously attuned to the omnipresent cosmic vibration receive untold blessings. The scriptures classify ordinary chanting as 1. Repeated loud utterances of the word Aum, 2. Repetitions of Aum in whispers, and 3. Continuous chanting of Aum in one's mind, listening to it mentally. Superconscious chanting, however, is that in which the mind is deeply directed to the repetition of and the actual profound listening to the cosmic sound as it vibrates in the ether. This is the true way of contacting God as He is expressed in creation. Cosmic Om sound is the combined vibration of the three phases of nature: creation, preservation, and dissolution, operative in the physical, astral, and causal universes. So those are the three main Hindu gods, too, right? What is it? Vishnu, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. The vocal chanting of Om should be intoned first in a high pitch, representing creation, then in a lower pitch, representing preservation, then in a still lower tone that gradually fades away, representing dissolution. The chanting should be first loudly, then softly, then gently, until it is inaudible or mental only. The real or superconscious chanting of Om, however, consists not in the imitative vocalizations of Om, but actually hearing the holy sound. All physical sounds are transmitted through the medium of ether, but although Aum vibrates in the ether, which is the background of all manifested activity, the Aum sound vibrates independently of the etheric medium. It is thus referred to as anahata nada, a sound produced otherwise than by being beaten or struck, that is, without detonation, because it manifests in the yogi's intuition without striking his eardrum through the medium of ether. As with physical sounds, Om, being a spiritual vibration, is not heard physically but felt spiritually. Patanjali meant that only that yogi can attain God whose mind is superconsciously fixed on the cosmic sound, the eternal divine manifestation. Such a yogi is an accomplished brahmachari. His heart is overflowing with the sacred joy that follows perception of Om. When a devotee experiences the bliss of God, the comfort of the Holy Ghost behind the cosmic sound, his heart becomes serene. He loses all fear of ever being diverted from his exalted state, excuse me, or of becoming entangled in material sensations. A yogi who has united his soul with the cosmic sound and thereby experiences its ineffable bliss is spoken of as united to the Lord. His heart, filled with divine joy, is no longer subject to likes and dislikes, as is the ordinary person's heart during the contacts with matter and its essential oppositional states. This section is subtitled, Through Aum, God is accessible to all devotees. An avowed man of renunciation, fearlessly, with serene heart and controlled mind, can think of God as his supreme goal. But in a higher state, the yogi becomes one with God. Having found the Lord through Aum and its pratyapadya, the cosmic bliss that follows after the perception of the cosmic sound or Holy Ghost, he achieves complete liberation. The Holy Ghost is spoken of by the Hindus as Aum, by the Muslims as Amin, and by the Christians as Amen. or the Word. In Revelations 3:14, we find this definition, quote, "These things saith the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of the creation of God," unquote. Wow. This Amen is the cosmic sound which, as divine witness, faithfully accompanies all vibratory creation from its beginning. Even as sound accompanies or declares the running of a motor, in other words, Amen or is an, quote, ear witness, unquote, that declares and as accessible to all devotees the tangible presence in all creation of the Creator. The Hindu Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, the Christian Bible, and the greatest book on yoga, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, unanimously declare the cosmic sound to be the outward manifestation or witness of the Lord in creation. Krishna, Jesus, and Patanjali all taught that man must receive the Holy Ghost, the Comforter, in order to reach the Christ intelligence within it and God the Father existing beyond it, beyond or vibratory creation. All souls have descended into matter from God the Father beyond creation, God the Son or Christ intelligence, and God the Holy Ghost. Every soul has therefore to ascend to the Spirit, unmanifest absolute, through the stages of its triune manifestation, Holy Ghost, Son, and Father, Tat, and Sat, of the Hindu scriptures. Verse 15, and I'm going to take a quick drink. Verse 15, quote, "The self-governed yogi he whose mind is fully under control, thus engaged in his soul in ceaseless meditative union with spirit, attains the peace of my being, the final nirvana, deliverance," unquote. And the commentary elucidates, by practicing the eightfold yoga, the devotee first experiences ecstasy for a short time. By deeper practice, he is able to remain divinely entranced for longer periods. The ecstatic state of perception of God without perception of the universe is called Savikalpa Samadhi or Samrajnata Samadhi. It is seldom, if ever, possible for a yogi to remain during his entire lifetime in the bodily inactive state of Savikalpa Samadhi. An interesting historical incident, one to which my father was an eyewitness, may be recounted here. Certain Bukailash princes of Kirapur, near Calcutta, ordered a pond dug in their property at Sundarban forest in Bengal. In the course of this operation, the bodies of 7 men were unearthed and subsequently taken to the palace compound. Geologists testified that the men must have been interred about 200 years previously. Thousands of people in Calcutta, my father among them, flocked to see the men, who were engrossed in a state of ecstasy, exhibiting no outward signs of life, their bodies in a perfect state of preservation. It was told that failing to rouse the saints by the application of hot towels on the head, and by other methods of resuscitation commonly known to revive fakirs in demonstrated states of suspended animation, the princes, against the protestations of friends, ordered servants to drive hot pokers into the flesh of the inanimate sadhus. This barbaric treatment forced the saints to return to outward consciousness. One of them sternly addressed the Bukailash princes, quote, "We have planned to remain for a few more years in this ecstatic state in order to destroy our past karma and attain liberation. Since you have cruelly disturbed us, you must suffer your own karma," unquote. The saints then simultaneously passed away. Their bodies, which soon decayed, were publicly cremated. Some say the Bukailash princes soon after died suddenly. Other accounts do not support this contention, but do refer to unusual disasters having caused great sufferings to the family. Interesting. The interred saints had been experiencing an unusually prolonged state of Savikalpa Samadhi. Incredible as the story may seem to a skeptic, it is no more so than other authenticated accounts of varying degrees of life suspension. Persons have lived for months or years in a comatose state and then return to normal consciousness. Many cases of a complete suspended animation, cessation of all vital signs, with subsequent recovery are accepted fact, e.g. the mother of Robert E. Lee, the famous Civil War general. Didn't know that. The ability to enter a trance state of suspended animation at will has been demonstrated by yogis and fakirs, renowned among whom was the early 19th century sadhu Haridas, or Haridas, who knows. If unconscious states of suspension be acceptable to the mind of reason, how much more so the ability of advanced yogis to retain conscious activity on a higher plane of perception while the body, a mere physical instrument used on earth, rests in a suspended state. Indeed, mystics and saints of all religious persuasions have been observed in this Savakalpa Samadhi state. It is good that man is sometimes confronted by the unusual to jar his limited. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. It is good that man is sometimes confronted by the unusual to jar his limitation-drugged mind from its complacency. The laws of nature run their fixed course, but they are manipulatable by man, the lords who have been given dominion over the earth. If this were not so, there would be today no travel by airplane, no viewing of images passing through the ether to television sets, no medical wonder drugs, and the quote unquote miracles that are yet to be brought into being in the future. Jesus said, quote, "Verily, verily, I say unto you that he that believeth on me, the works that I do shall he do also, and greater works than these shall he do," unquote. While small-minded men cry, "Impossible," the pathfinders of the world calmly pursue their goals and demonstrate that the impossible was, instead, inevitable. I love that. That's good. Instances like that of the Bukailash saints, however, are purposely rare. They are reminders of man's potential for self-mastery, but such extremes are not intended to be a common part of the divine plan. Remaining in the bodily inert state for long periods of time has its dangers. Therefore, the properly instructed yogi learns to enter and leave Savikalpa Samadhi state at will. This achievement enables him to retain his God communion in the active state of worldly affairs. The Lord does not wish his children indefinitely to remain inactive in ecstasy. He wants them to work out his drama in a state of divine realization, Nirvikalpa Samadhi or Asamprajnata Samadhi. By entering this highest state, the yogi is liberated. He can retain his divine realization during the conscious, subconscious, and superconscious states. The advanced yogi, being united with God, can watch his own body while it is working or while it is inactive in ecstasy, even as God can watch both his immanence and his transcendence. The yogi, one with the ocean of God, watches it and his little bodily wave as one and the same thing. Such a yogi is spoken of as having attained the supreme state of nirvana, or complete ego extinguishment. The soul does not vanish but retains its individuality, expands into spirit. Nirvana signifies the final extinction by destruction of all rebirth making unfulfilled desires of the karmic causes that compel a soul to reincarnate. Verse 16, quote, "O Arjuna, the gourmand, the scanty eater, the person who habitually oversleeps, the one who sleeps too little, none of these find success in yoga." And unquote. And the commentary continues, unbalanced states are obstacles for the yogi. The beginner should fulfill all the normal conditions of healthy bodily existence. Otherwise, physical troubles will entangle the mind and preclude the deep meditation upon which spiritual progress is dependent. The sadhaka should thus abstain from all excesses, lest his body become an obstruction to the path of divine progress. My guru, Swami Sri Yukswar, wisely counseled, quote, "Throw the dog a bone," unquote. Give the body its due, neither pampering nor abusing it, and then forget the body. In a natural way, as the inner consciousness becomes spiritualized through the success in yoga, the body also becomes spiritualized, and its quote unquote normal demands gradually diminish. Its normal demands gradually diminish. Yoga scriptures enjoin that the aspirant should be a, quote, proper eatarian, unquote. That is, he should have a balanced diet, one with sufficient protein, fat, carbohydrates, and vitamins and minerals. But overeating, even of healthy foods, causes disease. Also, when the devotee tries to meditate on a full stomach, he may be conscious of the bodily load and of labored breathing instead of breathless, joyous state of superconsciousness. Eating insufficiently, on the other hand, leads to physical and mental weakness. Oversleep dulls the nervous system. Too little sleep produces a tendency to sleep against one's will. Yogis point out that oversleep makes the body lazy. The throat and the nasal passages become filled with phlegm. The devotee should always keep his body free from the accumulation of excess mucus. If a diet of raw food is found helpful in this regard, the yogi should follow it religiously. Loss of sleep destroys mental freshness. A dual mind cannot concentrate on the joy of the soul within. Some yogis advise sleep in the earlier part of the night. After sleep, performing ablutions and cleaning the mouth and the nostrils. The devotee should practice Kriya Yoga. Some yogis advise those who have their time under their control to sleep in the afternoon for 5 hours and to practice yoga and ecstasy meditation during the greater part of the night. Quote unquote night consists of the period between sunset and sunrise. No kidding. But yogis refer to the hours between 9:30 p.m. and 4:30 a.m. As the quote great night unquote, particularly suitable for meditating owing to less disturbance from certain magnetic earth currents. Sleep is spoken of as pseudo ecstasy. Compelled by fatigue, the ego is dragged into slumberland to experience subconsciously the state of the peaceful soul, avoiding all excesses and the enjoyment of the senses of sight, hearing, smell, and taste and touch. An advanced yogi the advanced yogi is able to go consciously beyond the state of sleep and thus to enjoy the unending bliss of superconsciousness. Verse 17. He who will, with proper regularity, eats, relaxes, works, sleeps, and remains awake will find yoga the destroyer of suffering. Unquote. The commentary continues, the yogi should be temperate in all his habits. This stanza points out that the novice yogi should not try to continue unbrokenly in meditation, with the exception of a few hours of sleep, thus ignoring the performance of good outward actions. It is unnatural, indeed impossible, for a beginner in the path of yoga to remain in the superconscious state of ecstasy, alternated only by sleep and not also by proper activities ordained by God and nature. Reference to regularity in eating, relaxing, working, sleeping, and waking admits to a deeper spiritual interpretation. During the practice of yoga, swallowing air, the ingestion of prana and oxygen, is called astral eating. Thus, quote, eating, unquote, refers to the breath. The devotee learns to distill life force out of air and thereby to reinforce a supply of prana. His body is gradually freed from bondage to solid and liquid foods. The yogi is advised to be regular in the eating of this air food. He should avoid excessive swallowing of air and also too little breathing of air. Excessive or forceful breathing or willful holding the breath in the lungs for prolonged periods is harmful. Similarly, the person who unscientifically reduces his breathing takes in insufficient oxygen and thereby poisons his system by too great an accumulation of carbon dioxide in the venous blood. By regular rhythmic breathing, the yogi learns to distill energy from the proper amount of oxygen present in the naturally inflated lungs during inhalation, and to properly expel poisonous carbon dioxide, accrued from the decarbonization of his blood during normal exhalation. Quote, regularity in relaxation, unquote, recreation, signifies that the yogi should breathe neither too heavily nor too scantily, but evenly, as in Kriya Yoga, whereby the breath becomes neutralized, i.e., quote unquote, still or relaxed. By, quote, regularity in work, unquote, the yogi is instructed to perform faithfully the divine action of meditation, along with the temperate performance of dutiful actions ordained by God and nature, those that contribute to his own welfare and salvation, and also those that help to bring other true seekers to the path of God, less by his words than by his examples. The section subtitled Yogic Interpretation of, quote, regularity in eating, relaxing, working, and sleeping, unquote. The dreamless state of subconscious sleep, the dreamless subconscious state, and the state of wakefulness have a deep meaning that is explained by yogis in the following way. The ordinary person experiences three states, which, connected as they are with the body and matter, are collectively called the delusive dream state. The true wakeful state is perceived when the yogi rises above all his subconscious and conscious dream states and is conscious in the ever wakefulness of God. The devotee, according to the esoteric interpretations of this stanza, is advised not to indulge excessively in the dream perception of worldly experiences in the sleep of delusion. He is also advised in the initial state not to sleep too little, to remain too little conscious of the material world, by trying to stay in the state of divine ecstasy all the time. The beginner yogi should strike a balance between divine activities and deep meditation. He who, in a balanced way, tries to be both human and divine will automatically find that he experiences equal joy whether he is in the state of human activity or in the state of deep meditation. When a novice yogi tries continuously to remain in ecstasy and to perform no good outward works, he is unable to do so, and he is also unsuccessful in destroying his mortal karma. The yogi who is not lazy and who performs both divine and worldly duties to please both God and man burns out his seeds of karma. By mastery over outer activities, transforming their material nature by divine thoughts, the yogi attains liberation and the permanent destruction of all causes of suffering. This next section is called Attaining Self-Mastery and the Control of the Mind. Verse 18, when the chitta, feeling again, is absolutely subjugated and is calmly established in the self, the yogi, thus devoid of attachment to all desires, is spoken of as God attuned. And self here is obviously referring to the soul. And so, unquote. The commentary continues, when the human heart is constantly absorbed in divine blessedness, it is automatically disunited from the lesser pleasures of the senses. If a man sees a beautiful estate, permitting his eyes, mind, and intelligence to enjoy it impersonally, without a desire to possess it, he is not being entangled by his visual perception. But the sense-identified individual, at the very sight of the charming tract, may be seized by lust for its possession. The materialist, therefore, has no control of his chitta or his feeling. He is ruled by uncontrolled emotions that lead to the miseries born of likes and dislikes. In this stanza, the Gita points out that the yogi should be fully concentrated in enjoying the blessed perception of the soul, and thus so absorbed his feelings that they are uninfluenced by material longings. Verse 19. The illustrations of unflickering flame of light, quote, the illustration of an unflickering flame of light in a windless spot may be used in reference to a yogi who has conquered his feeling, chitta, by the practice of meditation on the self, unquote. And the commentary continues, quote, as a steady flame of light from a candle or an oil lamp sheltered from the wind reveals the beauty of material objects around it, so the unwavering light of inner concentration, free from gusts of restlessness, reveals the everlasting glory of spirit, unquote. To keep a candle flame unflickering, it must be sheltered from any breeze. Similarly, the flame of the yogi's meditation-born perception must remain steadily burning, undisturbed and unwavering before the gusts of delusion and passion feeling. A yogi who thus guards the flame of peace from the onrush of momentary desires and innate likes and dislikes arising from an uncontrolled restlessness in his faculty of feeling, chitta again, discovers in that tranquil light the secret presence of God. As a flickering light cannot distinctly reveal the outlines of objects near it, so the spiritual perception of a yogi who is agitated by material desires does not reveal within him the clear presence of the divine. Oh. Nice little picture here. Verses 20 to 23. 20. The state of complete tranquility of the feeling, chitta, attained by the yogi. Okay. The state of complete tranquility of the feeling, which is chitta, attained by yoga meditation, in which the self, ego, perceives itself as the self, soul, and is content fixed in the self, and its content in the self, fixed. Okay. Let me go back and read that again without the extra stuff. Well, yeah. The state of complete tranquility of the feeling attained by yoga meditation in which the ego perceives itself as the soul and is content in the self, i.e., it is fixed in the self. The 21st verse says, the state in which the sense-transcendent immeasurable bliss becomes known to the awakened intuitive intelligence and in which the yogi remains enthroned, never again to be removed. 22. The state that, once found, the yogi considers as the treasure beyond all treasures, anchored therein, he is immune to even the mightiest grief. 23. That state is known as yoga, the pain-free state. The practice of yoga is therefore to be observed resolutely with a stout heart. And the commentary elucidates, when by the practice of yoga the feeling no longer flickers with distractions, those gusty, conditional responses to the machinations of nature, but is immersed in interiorized concentration, the body-identified pseudo-soul discovers its true self and becomes enwrapped in the bliss of spirit-identified soul. In the unwavering light of sense-transcendent intuitive perception, the reflective shadowy ego first commingles with the image of its true self and then unites with the omnipresent flame of spirit. The inner blaze of eternal bliss destroys forever all the dream shadows of suffering. Stanzas 20 and 21 describe the four states of primary ecstasy attained by the yogi in the advanced stages of yoga. In Samprajnata or Savikalpa Samadhi, which in turn lead to the highest samadhi, asamprajnata, or nirvikalpa samadhi, the ultimate union referred to in stanza 23 as, quote, the pain-free state, unquote. In the first state of primary ecstasy, the body-identified ego in meditation meets its true self, the soul, begins to taste the blessedness of the bliss of the soul, and becomes, quote, content, unquote, concentrated, fixed, in the joy of that nature. As a result of that one point in concentration, the yogi attains the second state, quote, complete tranquility of the feeling, unquote. His attention, intellect, and feeling operate operative in the savikalpa states of savitarka, savichara, and sananda sambrajavana samadhi have become entirely divorced from their sense-identified gross functions, and in their subtle nature are anchored in the bliss of the soul in the sasmita state of pure individualized being. When the external activities of the faculty of intelligence are arrested and the cognitive instruments turned within, the intelligence then draws its knowing power from the intuition of the soul. In this intense transcendent state, the inner bliss is thus, quote, known to the awakened intuitive intelligence, unquote. Discovering the soul, the yogi also begins to perceive within his being the bliss of omnipresent God. After the physical ego metamorphoses into its true self, the soul, then the bliss of the soul expands and merges into the greater bliss of the spirit. In the third state, the yogi experiences not only intermittent ecstasy, but finds his cosmic contact existing permanently beneath his consciousness, to be enjoyed any time he enters the savikalpa samadhi state. The last state of the fourfold primary ecstasy is attained when the yogi becomes absorbed in the cosmic bliss, not only in the meditative state of samadhi, but also when he is able to bring his divine perceptions with him when he returns to the conscious state of bodily activity. He is gradually able to hold on to these after effects of samadhi for longer and longer periods, during which he is undisturbed by any quote-unquote pain, the evil effects of nature's alternating conditions of duality. When he can remain perpetually in that pain-free state, he is spoken of as having mastered all four states of primary ecstasy. He then passes on to the state of secondary for the highest ecstasy, the nirvikalpa samadhi. He becomes one with spirit, quote, enthroned, never again to be removed, unquote, never again to come down to the painful sphere of body identification. Even in the fourth state of primary ecstasy, complete liberation from physical and mental pain is not possible, owing to the soul's being conscious of the body and manipulated by its faculties, as soon as any diminution occurs in the yogi's perception of divine bliss. The highly advanced yogi may experience brief periods of nirvikalpa consciousness, even before becoming permanently established in that state. The next subsection is called Nirvikalpa Samadhi, permanent extinguishment of suffering. Sorry. Clear categorical distinctions are not always possible in defining the yogi's experiences and realizations, for they may be an intermixture of states of a matter of degree, depending on the quality and object of his meditation. For example, a person may point to a leaf in a painting and say, for all practical purposes, it is green, but an artist would more accurately describe it as a mixture of yellow and blue, expressing more or less of either one or the other pigment. Similarly, the term yoga or divine union is applicable to various stages of realization, but its ultimate meaning is absolute union with spirit. Absolute union is the permanent establishment of the consciousness in nirvikalpa samadhi. Thus, for purposes of comparison, the true or ultimate nirvikalpa state, the state, quote, without difference, unquote, is when the yogi is permanently and irrevocably united to God in both the meditative and physically active spheres of consciousness, as contrasted with intermittent experiences of this state. When the soul of the yogi is forever united in nirvikalpa samadhi to spirit, it cannot again experience any physical or mental suffering. This state is spoken of in Sankhya philosophy as, quote, the permanent extinguishment, unquote, or, quote, quote-unquote, uprooting of all physical, mental, and spiritual causes of suffering. Pardon me while I cough and take a drink. The true definition of yoga is given in these stanzas. The purpose of yoga is to furnish a practical means for uniting the body-identified ego or pseudo-soul with the true spirit-identified soul. Yoga also means the complete union of the soul with the spirit, the source from which it emanated. In the 23rd stanza, every spiritual seeker is advised to practice, well, this subsection is called Make Today's Meditation Deeper Than Yesterday's and Tomorrow's Deeper Than Today's. So, going back, in the 23rd stanza, every spiritual seeker is advised to practice yoga not in a haphazard or depressed state of mind, but with great enthusiasm and perseverance. He should try undauntedly to unite his ego with his soul and his soul with spirit until he reaches the final beatitude in which the soul is never again to be separated from spirit. The reincarnation making past seeds of good and bad action are forever roasted in the all consuming fire of ultimate wisdom. The Gita points out the impossibility of attaining satisfaction by practicing yoga methods desultorily. Every yogi should joyously try to make his daily meditation deeper than the previous day's meditation. His yoga practice of tomorrow should always be deeper than the one of today. Again, the yogi should not be satisfied by deep meditations for 1 or 2 years, but should practice yoga with ever increasing intensity to the end of his life, and for incarnations for that necessary. Better it is to try to be free in one life or in a few lives than to undergo the suffering of thousands of incarnations, owing to lack of continuous efforts for salvation. The yogi who is not determined to meditate until final emancipation is achieved by the removal of all seeds of karma lodged in the subconsciousness, is apt to be discouraged and to give up his yoga practice because he has not quickly found the ultimate state. He should, however, intensely meditate without concentrating on the fruits of his actions. The following story will encourage laborious, disheartened yogis. A man planted a flower seed in his garden. He looked after it, steadfastly weeding and watering the soil around it. A robust plant appeared, but for years no flower. He thought of destroying the plant, but finally decided, quote, "My business is to look after the plant. It is for God to produce the flower. I will keep myself busy in tending the plant and not in concentrating on my flowerless labors." Unquote. Years passed. He contented himself with the care of the plant and forgot all about the flower. One sunny morning, when a breeze was gently blowing, he smelled a strangely attractive fragrance. He ran to his plant and stood speechless in joy. There in front of him was the gorgeous flower. The aromatic beauty had always been present in the plant, a hidden potential awaiting the right moment of blossoming and made possible by his labor of love. The yogi should similarly keep himself busy nurturing his plant of self-realization. If he is not impatient, he will find one day when God, in his infinite wisdom, deems it proper, the amaranthine flower of eternal freedom. Verse 24, quote, "Relinquish without exception all longings born of sankalpas, plannings, and complete relinquish without exception all longings and born of plannings, and completely control sheerly with the mind the sensory organs, the sensory powers, and their contact with ubiquitous sense objects." Unquote. The commentary continues, "To reach the inner sanctum of God, the yogi should race his inwardly marching attention so that it is not seized by the bandits of outer sensations or by the stronger villains of overpowering restless thoughts and desires that lurk in the path of concentration. The yogi, while meditating upon God, should not distract his attention by allowing himself to ruminate on material objects, mentally planning and replanning material activities for the fulfillment of desired ends. He should renounce without reserve all such desires born of egoistic mental plannings, and he should scoop out from within all desires that are already entrenched in the subconscious. His mind should be withdrawn from those material objects all around him that give rise to sensation of sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, and their resultant multifarious thoughts and new longings. When the mind is singularly concentrated, when the mind is singularly concentrated in meditation, all distractions are arrested. But until such interiorization is mastered, the devotee must persistently practice mind control. He should also take common sense measures to eliminate or at least minimize invasive external stimuli. This is why it's important to have a good place to meditate, right? All beginner yogis should therefore close their eyes during meditation, shutting off all distracting sights. It is also good for them to meditate in quiet surroundings, and certain techniques, such as meditation on Om, it is advised to practice with ears closed. These precautions help to eliminate sounds, the most distracting of all sensations. The yogi should be careful also to meditate in a place devoid of extreme heat or cold and of pervasive good or bad odors, lest his senses of touch and smell be stimulated. A place frequented by such tormentors as mosquitoes or ants should be avoided. Nor should the mosquito or the mosquito, nor should the meditator keep in his mouth spices or chewing gum or other such stimuli that excite gustatory sensations, which in turn might cause mental diversion. When the senses are quiet, sensations are not aroused, distracted thoughts do not arise. When thoughts do not arise, subconscious thoughts do not spring up. The yogi who is careful to remove all causes of external and inner disturbances can easily concentrate within. This is a very good point, and you know, obviously, bring yourself to an environment that makes the most sense. Verse 25. With the intuitive discrimination saturated in patience, with the mind absorbed in the soul, the yogi, freeing his mind from all thoughts, will by slow degrees attain tranquility. Unquote. And the commentary continues. The yogi whose mind has been freed from external and internal distractions is then advised to guide his intuitive discrimination, buddhi in its pure or sense transcendent state, gradually inward to perceive the soul's bliss, not permitting any form of mental wandering, nor no matter how often the yogi's mind is distracted during meditation, he should exercise great patience. By continuous daily effort, he will succeed in establishing his mind on the joy of the soul. The new devotee may be discouraged by receiving only occasional blissful perceptions, interrupted constantly by fierce invasions of restless thoughts. The yogi is therefore exhorted to try patiently again and again until he is able firmly to fix his concentration on his inward goal. If a glass vessel is filled with muddy water and is then placed on a table, after a little while the mud particles settle down to the bottom of the glass. Similarly, if a person patiently waits for his mental mud to settle down and does not nervously stir up the water, the mud will not rise again to the surface. That's a good analogy. The particles in the glass of water will be clearly seen to be settling down to the bottom of the glass if not disturbed. The movements of the mud do not indicate agitation, but a mere settling down process. The ordinary man's mind, similarly, is muddy, with myriads of restless thought streams running into the river of his consciousness. During ordinary activity, the invading thoughts are completely homogenized with his consciousness. This is why the average man does not know how restless he is. He discovers it to his dismay when he starts to practice yoga. True that. For the first time in his life, begins then to stand aside as a conscious witness of the bewildering torrents of his thoughts. He may become erroneously convinced that his mind is made more restless by yoga than by worldly activities. Such a beginner yogi, watching aghast his unsettled and disobedient thoughts, is cautioned in this standa not to abandon meditation in despair, thus denying himself all chance of mind control. Rather, he should patiently await the settling down of his restless thoughts. Their commotion is just a prelude to their dissolution by yoga. The undiscouraged yogi who will find mind finally free from all distractions, gradually identifying himself with his quote unquote witnessing intuitive discrimination, adroitly bypassing the intruders of restless thoughts, the yogi attains the unshakable divine tranquility. Verse 26. Quote, whenever the fickle and restless mind wanders away for whatever reason, let the yogi withdraw it from those distractions and return it to the sole control of the self. Unquote. And the commentary elucidates, this advice is for the new yogi on how to cope with the unruly distracting thoughts that arise for some reason or for no reason when he sits to meditate. When a horse pulling a carriage tugs hard at the reins through unruliness or fright and tries to bolt from the path, an experienced driver will be able to subdue the animal. It requires the skill of both firmness and kindly patience. Similarly, as often as the subconsciously excited quote unquote stallion of a restless thought pulls the concentrating mind off of a tangent, the quote unquote charioteer of just discrimination should make repeated efforts to establish its authority. No matter how many times restlessness invades the mind, the yogi should guide his thoughts towards self realization. Mental restlessness during meditation causes unhappiness. Inner concentration on the soul produces unending joy. Verse 27. The yogi who has completely calmed the mind and controlled the passions and freed them from all impurities, and who is one with spirit, verily he has attained supreme blessedness. And the commentary continues. This stanza points out that the successful devotee, by repeated mental efforts to destroy restlessness, has overcome all obstacles in the path of yoga. By interiorized concentration, he has stilled the mind, disconnecting it from sensory stimuli, and has also controlled the passions, or rajas, the activated and activating emotional responses to sensory stimuli. All activities of nature are a result of rajas, the activating quality or guna of material creation.
interesting too is Shiva has a bunch of these gunas, activating qualities. They're like weird demons of some sort that follow him around. I think that's what they're called. Anyways, Rajas is either good or evil according to which of the other gunas, sattvas or tamas, oh right, exactly, predominate in that activities. I forgot that's what that meant. The nature-born dualities of good and evil are the quote-unquote impurities from which the soul must be freed in order to express its true nature. When the activating power in the mind is stilled by concentration, unruly thoughts wane into nothingness, and all restlessness ceases. The yogi becomes absorbed in transcendent bliss of the soul, free from all taint of relativities. Owing to the lack of activity, cessation of responses of the mind to external stimuli, and subsequent stillness of inner restlessness, the yogi attains a deep interiorized state of samadhi in which his blissful oneness with spirit is accompanied by bodily fixation. Verse 28, quote, the yogi, free from all impurities, ceaselessly engages the self, thus in the activity of yoga, divine union, readily attains the blessedness of continuous emergence in spirit. And the commentary continues. The 27th stanza cited the yogi who becomes free from the dualities of good and evil by forcibly holding the mind in the inactive state of ecstasy. The 28th stanza now speaks of the yogi who remains free, the enjoyer of cosmic bliss during the state of activity also, when his mind returns to its normal external functions. The yogi who at will can perceive the spirit in the state of ecstasy without bodily activity ultimately learns to retain his infinite consciousness during the performance of actions. Every yogi who should therefore refuse to succumb to the invasions of restlessness during meditation, uh, yes, when he is able to hold his concentration steady in the state of inner calmness, he perceives the soul. By further perseverance, he enters into ecstatic bliss and realizes the spirit. The fully accomplished yogi can move about in the world of relativity unstained by its dualities, remaining steadfastly in the blessed state of the Brahma Sampras. I can't say it. I'm gonna try it again. The Brahma Samsparsha, the bliss of touch, the bliss of the touch of spirit. I'll say. Let me go back. The fully accomplished yogi can move about in the world of relativity unstained by its dualities, remaining steadfastly in the blessed state, the bliss of the touch of spirit. Whew, that was brutal. I mean, this is like 16 letters in a word here. Excuse me. The next section is emergence of the self and spirit pervading all beings. Verse 29, quote, the soul united to spirit by yoga with the vision of equality for all things, the yogi beholds his self, which is spirit united, in all creatures and all creatures in the spirit, unquote. After describing in stanzas 27-28 how a yogi in his inactive and active states can perceive the divine, the Bhagavad Gita refers to stanza 29 to the God-knowing saint who is free from all karma and material delusions because he realizes, quote unquote, all things as not else than spirit. The liberated yogi is conscious of the spirit not only as cosmic bliss, but also as the cosmic light, that is, the true structure of all beings. Beholding everything as cosmic light, the yogi sees his spirit, a united, omnipresent self in all beings as emanations of that light. Verse 30. Quote, he who perceives me, Christ, Krishna, everywhere and beholds everything in me never loses sight of me, nor do I ever lose sight of him. Unquote. The divine, and the commentary continues, the divine lover beholds God through every window of thought and space, and the cosmic beloved beholds the devotee through every window of his omnipresent love. Enlocked in visions of love, God and the devotee enjoy unparted union. After uniting his soul to God, the yogi may still maintain the dual relation, the liberated devotee and God as the object of adoration. This stanza of the Gita definitely points out that the illuminated yogi does not lose the individuality of his soul. Instead, he finds his being extended into the being of the spirit. An ordinary person perceives himself as separate from God. The advanced yogi feels his soul as a wave in the ocean of cosmic consciousness. But the completely liberated yogi beholds his soul wave as a manifestation of the cosmic ocean. Such a yogi never says, quote, I am God, unquote, for he knows God can exist without his soul. But if he wants to, he can say, quote, God has become myself, unquote. That's an interesting distinction. The soul of the emancipated yogi can remain merged, if he wishes, in the Absolute as the Absolute, or the liberated yogi, owing to the retention of his God created individuality, which can never be lost, may remain or reappear in the physical body in which he was liberated in order to worship God in any personal concept, such as Father, Mother, Friend, Beloved, God, or in any desired materialized form, such as one of the deities, or as incarnate in one of the avatars, such as Christ or Sri Krishna, or as the all-pervading infinite. This stanza stresses the state of duality that may exist between the devotee and God, and devotee and God. The liberated devotee can watch God through every open niche of space, as the spirit can look at him through every pore of the sky. Such a liberated yogi never loses sight of God, nor does God ever lose sight of him. The true lover is God. We are all his beloveds, mistakenly seeking love in impermanent human beings. hmm The thirst for affection can never be quenched by the imperfect love of mortals. When the devotee, by the practice of loving mortals truly, learns to love all beings, and by meditation learns to love God supremely, then and then only is his longing for love satisfied. Absolutely. Every man who leaves the earth in an embittered state of unrequited love has to come back here until he finds the perfect love of God. When he recognizes the Lord as the only perfect lover, his heart seeks no other affection. After many prodigal wanderings, the yogi meets the cosmic lover in the bower of eternity. Wherever the yogi turns his attention, he sees his beloved peeping at him through the windows of stars and flowers, through every opening in the atoms and the pores of the sky. The cosmic lover similarly beholds the lost and found soul of the yogi steadfastly looking at him. To the ordinary person, God seems to be absent or vanished from the universe, but the yogi sees the ever watching eye of God gazing at him through all windows of space. The face of his cosmic beloved is omnipresent. Wow. I have goosebumps after reading that. There are so many things that I would just like to have a tangent on this last two paragraphs. Wow. Oh boy. Well, I guess we'll just continue. Hmm. Yeah, well, going back to this part here, the true lover of God. Let me just say this. There's a lot of stuff we'll rest it here on this nice picture of this whole idea that we have in a lot of the. I'm not sure how much it is in the Hebrew text. I'm sure it's in there, but I know it's definitely in the Christian text, and especially very much so in Gnostics, the various Gnostic schools, because Gnosticism is not one thing, by the way. Um, but one of the things that you hear a lot of is this idea of the bridal chamber, right? And that I don't remember where it was written, whether it's in the Gospels or in one of the letters, but it talks about like each Christian becoming the bride of Christ, essentially, right? And this is what it's talking about. You know, the bridal chamber is that space in yoga that he's been elucidating here for now hours, about where I have been reading for hours and hours and hours. It's this whole idea is that when you can reach this space of connection, that is the bridal chamber. There is nothing but you and the divine, and that's all that there is. And once you just to touch it, let me just tell you, just touching it is enough to just jar your entire consciousness into it's like nothing you'll ever experience. But it's this whole idea. I mean, this is why a lot of nuns consider themselves to be married to Christ, because they have this complete blissful, feeling and understanding, which is again elucidated in all these last two chapters here, and amongst the whole Gita, for instance. But I just want to point out is that this is very much present in a lot of other ancient texts. If people understood how to read them and they understood how to actually realize that for themselves, there would be a lot less confusion about religion today. And people wouldn't be going away from religion. They would have the unqualified proof of their own experiences to teach them about that this is true. And that's something that I think one of the things that was the battle in early Christianity, and every religion for that matter, is that the people of unfortunate materialistic desires have used this knowledge and forgotten the real key to all of it, which is why our religions are such a mess, you know. Anyways, continuing. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. I have someone in the chat. Hypocrites. Oh, sorry. Hypocrites Matrix. Damn straight, brother. Thank you. I appreciate that. So continuing, because we still got something to read, and I'm running out of time here. So verse 31, quote, "That yogi stays forever in me," again, Christ, Krishna, "who, anchored in divine unity, whatever his mode of existence, realizes me as pervading all beings," unquote. And I'll just like to say I had a very humbling lesson happen in my life recently that has taught me just how still very connected I am to things and people and situations. And it was a good thing that it happened to me because I needed to have that slap across the face. Anyways, continuing. The yogi must realize the cosmic drama as God's dream motion picture, projected on the screen of space in man's consciousness by the infinite cosmic beam of spirit. Then he can everywhere behold God's light, no matter what part he plays in this movie of delusive shadows and divine light. The ordinary individual looks upon the world as made of matter, but the yogi who, by ecstasy, has united his soul with his spirit perceives the absolute cosmic consciousness and also its manifestation as the cosmic dream to be made of one substance. When a dreamer partially wakes up to the middle of his dream, he realizes that his consciousness and the objects in the dream are made by the same substance, his own mind. The yogi, awakened in God, can similarly perceive all the earthly dream objects in the so-called material world to be woven of the consciousness of God. It is in this state that the yogi realizes unity everywhere. He perceives not only that God dwells in all beings, but that all beings are his manifestations. The yogi dissolves all dual perceptions of matter and mind into the sole perception of cosmic consciousness. A yogi who is awake in God is ever united with him, whether in life or death, whether in this world of activity or in any other mode of existence. A yogi who has once awakened himself from this cosmic dream can no longer sleep in delusion like the ordinary man. Absolutely. In the subconscious state of slumber, or in the conscious state of existence, or in the superconsciousness of ecstasy, that yogi remains aware of God as the creator and dreamer of all. Verse 32, quote, "O Arjuna, the best type of yogi is he who feels for others, whether in grief or pleasure, even as he feels for himself," unquote. Man, I like that. That's so true too. I can tell you that from personal experience. So true. Continuing, a person identified with the body feels its pain and happiness as his own life. As his own. A yogi who is one with God knows the cosmos to be his own body. Feeling the afflictions and joys of all beings as his own, he tries to decrease their suffering and increase their true happiness. God manifesting as cosmic consciousness in the devotee relates through his intuition the following wisdom. An ordinary man selfishly perceives pleasure and pain only in connection with his own body, but the yogi who is identified with God perceives him everywhere in both animate and inanimate worlds. His mind is expanded in cosmic consciousness. As not a sparrow falls outside the sight of God, so the yogi who is one with the Father is conscious simultaneously of the smallest and greatest happenings in the universe. A devotee who perceives God in all beings feels naturally as his own the pleasures and pains of other beings. He wishes evil to none and tries to do good to all. The accomplished yogi is conscious of God alone. When he seemingly identifies himself with his body and outward works, he appears like an ordinary mortal, but within himself he always retains the consciousness of the ever-blessed Lord. The yogi who is free even while feeling the pleasures and pains of his body is one who can retain God consciousness. Further, he feels the pleasures and pains of others, yet beyond all experiences of duality, he realizes the cosmic blessedness of God, ever transcendentally existent. Such a yogi tries to help others to realize God and to rise above the alternations of pain and pleasure born of body identification. I have someone in the chat, Thoth the Atlantean. Welcome. I want to become a yogi so I can shoot lasers out of my eyes. I think that's a fakir you're looking to become, actually, bro. Or maybe not. Maybe I just assumed your gender. I'm not sure. Continuing, this section is called The Lord's Promise. The preserving yogi ultimately is victorious. Wait, before I go and do this, I do want to come back to this for a second because this has very much become a huge part of my life in the past 5 or 6, 7 years, I should say. Longer, but very much so. It's something that I have consciously, actively been doing and living in this way on my own. This is before I ever ran into this book. And this is just on my own evolutionary spiritual path. And one of the things that's been so illuminating for me is as I do research and try to understand some of the experiences that I've experienced and the things that I've done. One of the things that has been interesting to me is the way that I'm able to affect people's lives in my periphery. At first, I didn't really understand anything at all, and it was just kind of like things would just happen. I'd be like, "Oh, isn't that strange?" But as just like this book constantly talks about the development of intuition, this is very important because as your intuition develops, you start to see things in so many different ways beyond what you normally would have thought, and it's very strange because you start to understand people. Just as it says here, further he feels the pleasure and pain of others. This is absolutely an absolute fact. And sometimes one can address these things with people directly, and sometimes you can't. And even when you can't address these things correctly, the deeper you can connect into spirit, the more subtle background, let's just say spiritual help, you can actually give to people. And your simple presence and example and love and just the energy that exudes off of you can change people's minds. I'm telling you this from a total place of full experience now on many, many people that who I have helped change the very direction of their life in an unexpected ways. I didn't even mean to do it. Again, I didn't have any attachments to the fruit of my actions. And I didn't even know that that was something I wasn't even supposed to care about in a lot of ways. I came to understand that that was the reality of how these things work. Because the more I invested in the fruits of the actions, the more failure I ran into when I really didn't care about it and I just did it for the sake of doing it because it was the right thing to do at the right moment in time. I can tell you that miraculous things can happen, and I do mean that when in the truest sense of the word, not like turning water into wine, but changing the very direction of somebody's life is miraculous for that person, and they'll never forget it, and neither will I in those experiences. So don't underestimate the power to feel other people and your ability to intuitively understand what to do when that as you as a person and in your own spiritual path progresses, and use that as a tool to understand how good your intuition is becoming through life, because it's those little things, those little signs that tell you like you are being successful, right? And it's those things, it's those little things that convince you that yes, this is actually real rather than just some random thing that you're thinking. So, and it's stuff like that that makes stuff like that makes the journey for each person very real, and not just real, but worth walking these paths and worth living in this way. So, anyways, continuing, the Lord's promise, a persevering yogi ultimately is victorious. Verse 33, quote, Arjuna said, O Madhusadana Krishna, owing to my restlessness, I do not behold the permanent enduring effect of the equalizing yoga that thou hast related to me. Unquote. The commentary continues, at times the yogi feels his invading restlessness to be stronger than the restlessness dissolving power of yoga. He should then patiently pray to God until that intoxication of delusive habit wears off and he becomes free. Arjuna, the devotee, prays with God, quote, O God, thou slayer of Madhu, the demon of ignorance, the yoga that I have been practicing has given me some tranquility, yet I do not see its lasting benefit. Restlessness still invades my mind, unquote. That's good. The novice yogi, even after repeatedly experiencing peace during the practice of yoga, may yet be confronted by restless thoughts suddenly springing to the surface of consciousness from long hidden subconscious sources. This invasion should not influence the yogi to abandon yoga through disbelief in its power to produce a lasting tranquility. He will find that the subconscious habits of restlessness will gradually cease to appear in a mind that becomes strongly fortified by the habit of meditation. O yogi, if by one or two divings into the ocean of divine perception you do not find the pearls of God communion, do not blame the ocean as lacking in the divine presence. Rather, find fault with your skill in diving. Whew, that's good. Again and again, sink into the ocean of meditation and seize there the pearls of blessed communion. Oh, excuse me. In this stanza, we find even an ideal devotee like Arjuna, who has many times experienced the perfect calmness and equilibrium of yoga, to be harboring doubts about the ability of yoga permanently to banish his mental disharmony, instead of finding fault with the quality of his own meditations. That's such a great point. Verse 34, quote, Verily the mind is unsteady, tumultuous, powerful, obstinate. O Krishna, I consider the mind as difficult to master as the wind, unquote. And the commentary elucidates, the devotee in deep despair says, "Oh, quote, oh Krishna, how may one control the mind, which is ever restless like the volatile breath in spite of yoga practice?" Unquote. When the bad habit of restlessness is conquered by the stronger habit of tranquility, that is acquired by patient, enthusiastic, long continued yoga practice, the devotee finally finds the answer to his question. The yogi who has often experienced the divine bliss of meditation should remain watchful against the sudden appearance of material desires and worldly moods. Care should be observed lest the devotee stop practicing yoga through the influence of misleading subconscious impulses that mar tranquility and arouse interest in mental material pleasures. Instead of giving strength to his abnormal nature of restlessness, the yogi should strive to recall his true quiescent nature as manifested during yoga practice and should strengthen it by deeper meditation. Arjuna compares the mind to the wind. Here, the deeper meaning of wind is breath, for the changeableness and waywardness of the human mind is ineluctably bound up with man's breathing patterns. The glory of India's ancient sages is that they discovered the liberating truth: to control the breath is to control the mind. The ordinary man may try unsuccessfully to restrain his breath by unscientifically holding it in his lungs. The Kriya Yogi, on the other hand, is able to oxygenate his blood scientifically and thus to remove it from most of the carbon dioxide. He requires little breath. He is the real way of controlling the breath. It is impossible to control the breath by unscientific way of holding it in the lungs. The discomfort of forcibly withholding the breath proves that the act is injurious to health. During the forcible withholding of the breath in the lungs, the oxygen is used up, resulting in a greater accumulation of carbon dioxide in the air tubes. This causes pressure, discomfort, and pain in the lungs. No one should hold the breath in the lungs to the point of discomfort. Similarly, the ordinary man who tries forcibly to control the mind finds himself unsuccessful. But when he practices the scientific method of Kriya Yoga and learns to withdraw his life force from the five sense telephones, his mind is automatically freed from sensations and from the conscious and subconscious thoughts accruing from those sensations. The aspirant should not be discouraged by initial failure in the most difficult art of mind control. By scientific yoga, the beginner finds the right way to free the mind from all conscious and subconscious restlessness. Of course, much depends upon one's intensity, zeal, and continuity. These will help the mind to grow into the habit of peace and to rise above the unnatural mortal habit of restlessness, and is rooted in the identification of consciousness with the bodily senses. Verses 35 and 36. O, the blessed Lord said, 35, O Mahabaho, quote, mighty armed Arjuna, Undoubtedly, the mind is fickle and unruly, but by yoga practice and by dispassion, O son of Kunti, Arjuna, the mind may nevertheless be controlled. In verse 36, this is my word. Yoga is difficult of attainment by the ungoverned man, but he who has self-controlled will, by striving through proper methods, be able to achieve it. Unquote. And the commentary continues, it is natural for people who constantly indulge in restless habits to become more restless. Similarly, it is natural for calm devotees, those who perseveringly practice the proper methods of yoga, to become more divinely tranquil. The real nature of the soul, as ever new bliss develops, instead a powerful eclipsing, quote, second nature, unquote, of restlessness when identified with the body. In that state, it is the quote unquote natural it is quote unquote natural for the mind to be boisterous and unruly. Yet by yoga practice, when the mind contacts the soul's bliss and becomes disengaged from the short-lived sense pleasures, the consciousness of the devotee again displays its true restful divine nature. Man has not to acquire, but to remember the soul joy within. In response to the prayer of the ideal devotee Arjuna, his God incarnate Guru Krishna revealed to him the following wisdom, applicable to all yogis. Quote, O mighty armed devotee, made in the image of spirit, no doubt the mind is restless and difficult to control, but there are two ways to subdue it. First, by meditation and ecstasy, the mind must be taught to regain its natural power of abiding in the soul's tranquil state. Second, at the same time, the mind must be dispassionately engaged from the desires for pleasures of this world and of the hereafter, desires that stimulate the mind to restlessness. Unquote. Very, very good. In other words, the yogi should revive by daily deep yoga practice the memory of soul tranquility and should simultaneously keep the mind away from external and internal temptations. He cannot permanently feel the joy of his soul in meditation if he does not sever his desireful ties with the sensory environment. The yogi must learn to win the tug of war between soul perception and sense perception. In the initial state of yoga practice, the devotee is aware of the gripping influence of sense pleasures even though they are short-lasting, but he is little aware of the permanent unending bliss secreted in his soul. The discriminating yogi will therefore find it natural that the habits of sense pleasures gathered from incarnations will be of stronger influence than his fleeting glimpses of soul bliss perceived during meditation. But he will also realize that even though habits of sense pleasures are very strong, they are not stronger than is the eternal perception of divine bliss present in the soul, the inextinguishable inheritance from spirit. The yogi should not stimulate his material habits by remaining, through choice, in unspiritual environments and by merely dreaming of the heavenly joys of sainthood. By staying away from the worldly pleasure-reminding environments and by relinquishing sense attractions, the yogi is better able to concentrate on the divine bliss of the soul. As a naughty boy should be removed from a restless environment and kept instead in the company of a calm friend, so the yogi should remove his restless mind from sense entanglements and keep it concentrated on soul perceptions. The, quote, practice of yoga, unquote, is defined as repeated inner and outer efforts to remain in the eternal tranquility of the soul. Quote, unquote, dispassion is the act of disengaging the mind from all forms of sensory pleasures as found in the world or to be found in heaven, the astral realms. Many persons believe paradise, as described in the scriptures, to be a place where they can enjoy unlimited glorified sensory pleasures. That is true, isn't it? On many different religions. The yogi is warned to keep his mind away from everything that reminds him of impermanent worldly joys and that causes him to forget the everlasting bliss of his soul. Verse 37 and 39. Arjuna said, verse 37, O Krishna, what happens to a person unsuccessful in yoga, one who has devotedly tried to meditate but has been unable to control himself because his mind keeps running away during yoga practice? Verse 38, doesn't the yogi perish like a sundered cloud if he finds not the way to Brahman, spirit? Being thus unsheltered in him and steeped in delusion, sidetracked from both paths, and that's the one of God union and the one of right activities. And verse 39, please remove forever all my doubts, O Krishna, for none save thee may banish my uncertainties, unquote. And the commentary continues, the discouraged devotee in deepest prayer resorts to God as the mighty cosmic physician, who alone is able to cure the deep-seated disease of material doubts. Not all yogis in their present lifetime realize their goal just because they practice a yoga technique. There are two kinds of unsuccessful yogis. One type practices yoga with deep enthusiasm in the beginning, but afterwards relaxes his efforts. That's probably the majority of people. His initial enthusiasm carries him along with relative ease for a time, but because he lacks perfect non attachment, as soon as he allows any slack in his self discipline, he experiences strong resistance from his past bad habits that were only temporarily subdued. The second type of unsuccessful yogi continues to meditate regularly with devotion almost to the end of his life, even attaining a high degree of advancement. Shortly before death, however, owing to some past bad karma or present indulgence in bad company or to egotistical spiritual pride, the yogi loses his steady concentration on the soul's bliss and thus fails to attain the final divine union. An unsuccessful yogi often feels that he is like a cloud dispersed by the wind, unable to quench the thirst of himself or others by a rainfall of wisdom. He realizes he has strayed away from the path leading to God. He bemoans the fact that he is not established in Him. He feels that he is deluded, unable to ascertain his real duty in life. Such a discouraged devotee allows himself to be diverted from seeking union with God attained by following with uncompromising determination the path of right action, both dutiful and meditative actions, or if he has a more advanced yogi, or, or if he is a more advanced yogi, from becoming permanently established in God's union by securing himself in the highest ecstasy of unceasing contact with Spirit. Verse 40. Wow, this is a long chapter. The blessed Lord said, O Arjuna, my son, a performer of good actions never meets destruction. Whether in this world or in the beyond, he falls not into evil plight. Unquote. Arjuna here receives a wonderful reply from the divine preceptor. The words stand as a monument of inspiration to all sincere yogis who have failed to unite their souls with God because of obstructions arising from prenatal and postnatal actions, but who have nevertheless persisted in their spiritual efforts. So prenatal is pre-birth karma, or pre-birth karmic actions, and post-birth karmic actions. A man who does not seek divine union remains steeped in ignorance. His, quote, evil plight, unquote, is to be a target for all kinds of physical, mental, and spiritual sufferings. A person totally identified with the sense pleasures has no chance to get even a glimpse through the gate of eternal freedom. The fate of a sense addict is comparable in a way to that of the musk deer. A certain age, a navel sac of the deer bursts and exudes a fragrant musk substance. Frantically seeking the origin of the perfume, the deer sniffs wildly in every direction, not finding any external source of fragrance. The creature destroys itself by mad dashes among the rocks. Alas, if the deer had only put its nostrils to its navel. The sense addict, similarly seeking the fragrance of bliss in every place except the soul, perishes in trying to find pleasure. Had he concentrated his attention within, he would have discovered the longed for happiness. Man, I'm sure that speaks to a lot of people. The subtitle of this is The Yogi Sublimates Sense Cravings into Hunger for Soul Joy. It would indeed be unnatural for a person to find pleasure in feeding somebody else as often as he himself felt hungry. He would soon starve. The materialist similarly caters to the pleasures of his senses while his ego remains starved without divine bliss. His mistaken habit is to feed the senses in the hope of satisfying the inner hunger for happiness. The yogi, on the contrary, devotes himself to those good actions that sublimate the unnatural hunger for sense pleasure into the natural hunger for the soul's joy. The fallen yogi, who has occasionally succeeded in experiencing the superior bliss of his soul, cannot forget it. He well knows there is no comparison ever, but there's no comparison between ever new divine joy and the gross pleasures of the senses. Even a single taste of divine bliss through ecstasy as attained by Kriya Yoga practice will serve as a high incentive for more earnest spiritual efforts. Oh my God, someone is shooting off fireworks. Let me close my window. I meant to turn down the sound and I turned it back up again. Where am I at? The yogi, on the contrary, was okay. The fallen yogi who has occasionally succeeded in experience. Okay, right. I read that. Okay. God gives encouragement in this stanza to all devotees um, to seek their natural divine inheritance. Yes, indeed. So this whole part up here, though, the fallen yogi who has occasionally succeeded in experiencing the superior bliss of his soul cannot forget it. He well knows there is no comparison between ever new divine joy and the gross pleasures of the senses. This is true, but it doesn't mean that people can't get sucked into the whole, materialism of life all over again and get really sucked into it to the point where it's not forgotten, but it's one of those things where it's pushed to the back of one's mind. I've seen this in multiple ways in life. Continuing, God gives encouragement in this stanza to all devotees who see, oh yeah, soul joy, no matter how elusive, is every man's forgotten heritage. The sense addict who continues reveling in material pleasures, disregarding the counsel of the prophets, drifts farther and farther away from his true nature. The imperfect yogi, in spite of failures, tries to regain his memory of divinity. Therefore, even a fallen yogi is far superior to the materialist. The former is on the threshold of awakening from sense delusion, the latter is still asleep in ignorance. It is thus far better to be even a broken hearted fallen yogi than to be a complacent sense addict. Yeah. The subtitle of this section is All Souls, no matter how many times they fall, will ultimately be rescued. No matter how many times a sincere yogi falls down in the path of yoga, he struggles again towards this goal. The devotee who performs meritorious actions develops divine memory and good karma that impel him to seek liberation in this life or in the beyond. The memory of the divine bliss of yoga practice remains lodged in his subconscious mind. If he is not able to find full liberation in one life, in his next incarnation, the hidden memory of his past experiences of yoga sprouts forth in spiritual inclinations, even in his infancy. The fallen yogi should never be driven to despair by failures. Instead, he should be glad that he possesses sufficient spiritual fortitude to make the yoga effort. All his good inclinations and divine experiences of the past will be causes for further spiritual development in the next life. The money mad person, in spite of lifelong failures, continues to seek wealth. The sense addict, heedless of present or future miseries, repeats his indulgences and evils. The quote, dope fiend, unquote, does not give up narcotics even when warned of certain death. The wise man, similarly, is as stubborn in maintaining good habits as the ignorant man is in evil. Right stubbornness is born of divine stability. Word. It is greater to try unsuccessfully to find God than not to try at all. Exactly. The trial must come before any possibility of fulfillment. Even if unsuccessful, one should continue endeavoring to the end of his life. In the after-death state, he is blessed by the fruits of his efforts, and he will start his next incarnation with divine aspirations instead of with a dull, undisciplined consciousness. And part of that, by the way, is being born with good parents and being raised by good parents who basically help to put those blocks that were sort of meant for you when you're born in those kinds of situations. Just as an aside, continuing, an imperfect yogi should remember that man's relation with God is that of a son who may demand and receive what he asks from his own father, not that of a beggar who, in response to an appeal, may or may not receive a beggar's pittance. In this stanza, God assures man through his own son Arjuna that all his persevering children devotees, no matter how many times they have stumbled in the path of yoga, shall finally be rescued. The Christian Bible similarly says, "Ask, quote, ask and it shall be given you; seek and ye shall find; knock and it shall be opened unto you," unquote. And before we do this, I take a drink. Verse 41, quote, "A fallen yogi gaining entry into the world of the virtuous remains there for many years. Afterwards, he is reborn on earth in a good and prosperous home," unquote. I can't believe I just said that. I just swear to God, I did not know that was coming. See what I'm saying? Intuition, right? The Commentary continues. Advanced yogis who have not attained the final perfection get an opportunity to live a prolonged afterlife on beautiful astral planets. At the expiration of a certain karmic period, they are reborn on earth in families of righteous and prosperous people in order to enjoy simultaneously both spiritual and material happiness and thus to march towards liberation. In stanzas 37 and 39, two kinds of unsuccessful or quote unquote fallen yogis are described. One, those who have not found full liberation because of insufficient yoga practice and imperfect non attachment. Such devotees have allowed themselves to become diverted through the slackening of spiritual effort and by yielding to sense temptations. And number two, those accomplished yogis who, owing to the appearance of some hidden bad karma or egoistic tendencies just before death, become confused and do not achieve complete liberation. Though highly advanced and on the threshold of liberation, these two kinds of unsuccessful yogis failed to make the final effort in yoga that would have opened the portal to freedom. Thus are they referred to as quote unquote fallen, having slipped back momentarily, thereby removing themselves from the present opportunity for liberation. And it makes you really, 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 really wonder what it means by a fallen angel, doesn't it? Continuing, in stanza 41, the Lord describes how the first type, the lukewarm yogi failures, fares in the next world. Such yogis visit other planets inhabited by the virtuous and stay there happily so long as their meritorious karma holds out. Jesus Christ said, quote, "In my Father's house are many mansions," unquote. And I would just like to say, I did absolutely read that Journey of Souls book, which I would say supports this idea. So, continuing, I was like, so going back, Jesus Christ said, "In my Father's house are many mansions," signifying that the universe created by God has many inhabitable planets in the physical, astral, causal cosmoses. God's cosmic consciousness projected various subdivisional abodes within the three spheres of his universal creation. Advanced but still imperfect yogis who are disappointed in this world are given a chance to experience the happiness available in the bright astral spheres or are allowed to reincarnate on other planets of the physical universe that boast better conditions of existence than does our Earth. That is exactly what is said in the Journey of Souls book. I mean, exactly. Which was written decades and decades after this. Fascinating. Astronomers know that the Earth belongs to a certain galaxy and that many other island universes float in an infinitude of circular space. Someday other inhabited physical planets will be discovered. There will be interplanetary communication and travel. The horse carriage riders of past centuries could not imagine the existence of modern planes that travel in the stratosphere at supersonic speeds. Inventions of subatomic energy powered planes moving with incredible speed will make obsolete all present day airplanes. The snail, with its slow motion, cannot expect to go around the globe during its lifetime, but an airplane can encircle the Earth in a few hours. Today we cannot travel even to the comparatively close moon, but atomic energy powered planes will someday enable us quickly to reach distant planets. Yogis who can dislodge their astral bodies from their physical casings can travel in the astral world much faster than the speed of light. They can move from planet to planet with incredible swiftness. They realize that the physical, astral, and causal bodies and the physical, astral, and causal universes are all dream condensations of God's thoughts. Such masters are able to resolve everything into divine thought. They can instantaneously traverse eternity with the speed of thought. And I will say this too: if you guys don't know who Edgar Casey is, this last paragraph could have come straight out of one of his readings, because this is exact, and the next paragraph as well. Fascinating. Continuing, and they were alive at the same time period, by the way. Time and space are categories and relativities of God's mind. A master, by his own powerful thought, is able to annihilate time and space. Thought is the primary energy and vibration that emanated from God and is thus the creator of life, electrons, atoms, and all forms of energy. Thought itself is the finest vibratory energy, the speediest power among all powers. The vehicle of a great yogi's thought is powerful enough instantaneously to carry and cast a planet into the sun to be dissolved there, even as could God. This next subsection is called the yogi's after-death experiences in the astral world. As worms live in the soil, fish in the water, birds in the air, and man on the surface of this earth, so inhabitants of other physical worlds live under environmental influences far different from those of our planet. Beings who dwell on certain stars, for instance, absorb life energy directly. They do not breathe air like earthly beings. Many people erroneously imagine that no beings could live on a planet lacking in air. Fish may think that no life is possible without the medium of water. Just as certain bacteria can live in fiery environments, so there are beings who exist comfortably on planets that exude fiery energies. And that is true. There are literally are like funguses that grow inside of volcanoes. So go figure. In the astral world, beings live by life force, prana, that is finer than the electroprotonic or atomic energy. Life force is an intelligent energy, a cross between thought and energy. In the astral world, all appearances are energy responses to the thoughts of inhabitants. The astral scenes change according to the wishes of the astral beings. The causal world is very fine textured, superior to all physical and astral universes. Only the most advanced yogis can remain in the causal sphere, perceiving the subtle manifestations of the various thought planets in the causal ideational universe. Fallen yogis, those who advanced and then became lukewarm in their spiritual efforts, feel tired of this earth plane because here they have failed to attain supreme realization. If they happen to die in that state of discontentment, they are drawn by their spiritual longings to harmonious astral worlds that offer temporary solace. Again, right out of the Journey of Souls book. After living in such spheres, finding certain satisfactions for their discouraged desires, the imperfect yogis come back to earth, drawn by the force of their past mortal karma. Such confused yogi failures are reborn in prosperous, pure families with whom they live in comfort and at the same time have the opportunity to seek and attain further spiritual progress. In this way, they satisfy simultaneously their innate desires for sense pleasures and for salvation. This opportunity is justly afforded them because of good karma earned by their past life yoga efforts. Verses 42 and 43. Verse 42, quote, or he may reincarnate in a family of enlightened yogis. Verily, a birth like that is much harder to gain on this earth. I bet. Verse 43, quote, O Arjuna, he recovers the yoga discrimination attained in his former existence and tries more strenuously for spiritual success, unquote. The commentary elucidates, the Lord here relates what happens to the second kind of imperfect yogi, he who is closest to liberation, described in chapter 6, 37, 39, commentary above. When an advanced devotee is true to God to the end of his life and yet does not receive complete emancipation owing to the obstruction of some buried past karma, he receives a fresh providential opportunity. He is not to be diverted and longer detained by astral splendors or by the luxuries of a carefree earthly environment like the first kind of fallen yogi. Rather, he is suitably rewarded by rebirth in the home of a great yogi who is also a family man. There, in the company of his exalted parents, he finds no incentive to seek sense pleasures, but tries from his very early infancy to achieve the final spiritual glory. This kind of rebirth is very rare because very few yogis marry after receiving divine illumination. Yep, indeed. Some perfected yogis enter the householder's life at God's command in order to supply worldly people with an example of a perfect marriage. Weak yogis who have lust in their hearts and who marry to satisfy secret desires for sense enjoyment are not great masters. Because the Lord seldom asks devotees to marry after they have found salvation, birth in a family of emancipated yogis is naturally a rare occurrence. Shukadeva, the son of Vyasa, achieved birth in such a rare family. At the age of 7, Shukadeva left his relatives to find a guru. His father followed him to ask him to return home. He felt he could give his son liberation. But the great son of the great father said, quote, are you suffering from the delusion that I am your son? Though I know you could give me God realization, still I prefer to seek it from a disinterested guru, unquote. Vyasa smilingly admitted the truth in his son's surmise, and then directed Kushadeva to King Janaka of India, who was not only a monarch but a great yogi. When the better type of fallen yogi is born amongst liberated saints, he finds his aspirations reinforced by the spirituality example of his parents. they can transfer their God consciousness to their child at will. He therefore quickly attains the final freedom. The divine attainments of a yogi's past lives are everlastingly retained. All seeds of good karma are lodged in the cerebrum of the astral body, and when they are watered by remembrances and by vibrations of a good environment in a new life, they sprout forth and grow into the infinite tree of liberation. Stored up good desires and experiences tending towards liberation are the great forces that impel a yogi to make supreme efforts to reach his final goal. Verse 44. The power of former yoga quote, the power of former yoga practice is sufficient to force, as it were, the yogi on his onward path. An eager student of even theoretical yoga is farther advanced than is a follower of the outward scriptural rites, unquote. That is such a great verse, because that is absolutely the difference between what I eventually will elucidate into what I call lazy Christians versus Christianity, because you got the great majority of Christians who are scripturalists and believe that faith and faith alone and works and good works, but they don't even understand what half of those things mean. Something that's been a constant, I don't know, thorn in my particular spiritual path. I was born into really spiritual Catholic parents who shoved it down my throat a little harder than I probably wanted it. But I will always appreciate the fact that that happened, because it absolutely gave me the foundation to understand so much more in my life. Continuing. An alternative translation of the second sentence of this verse uncovers its esoteric meaning in reference to the practice of yoga. Quote, he who is eagerly desirous of realizing yoga union with spirit transcends the mere recitation of the words of Brahman, the sacred sound of Om. As past evil karma powerfully stimulates a man to indulge in sense pleasures, so strong past habits of God communion compel a reincarnated yogi to seek divine union. Like a shooting star, that yogi crosses the skies of delusion and reaches his spiritual destination. The spiritually inquisitive person who, with sincere eagerness, takes up the study of yoga, the science of sciences, receives more benefit than does the devotee who mechanically practices the exoteric ceremonies enjoined by the four Vedas, Rik, Rajur, Sama, and Atharva. The words of the Vedas or wisdom books are considered to be emanations of the omniscient sound of Om, Shabda Brahman. The great sages, or rishis, heard the sounds and memorized them. Later, the holy instructions were committed to paper. A deep seeker knows that a mechanical performance of sacred ceremonies and religious rites, or the mere chanting of the word Om, does not bring liberation. It is the person that communes with the Om sound who is the real knower of the Vedas and of all truth to be known. In fact, a body-identified person, one and unable to commune with the cosmic sound, was not allowed in ancient times to read the Vedic scriptures. The Gita therefore points out here that the yogi who is spiritually inquiring will not be satisfied with outward rituals, but will seek a knowledge of yoga, first in theory and then in practice. By yoga techniques, he will learn to contact the presence of God in creation through communion with his holy word, or creative vibration, and merging with his omnipresence, he will find the blessed absolute existing beyond the curtains of vibratory phenomena. Verse 45, quote, by diligently following his path, the yogi perfected by the efforts of many births is purged of sin, karmic taint, and finally enters the supreme beatitude, unquote. And the commentary continues, a good yogi is he who follows the spiritual meditative path with gradually increasing speed and with non-attachment. With steady thoroughness, he renounces material attachment, and with intense mental clarity, he seeks God communion. As the yogi proceeds in the path, he finds his mind passing through the various stages of concentration, of being once in a while calm and most of the time restless, of being half the time calm and half the time restless, of being nearly all the time calm and once in a while restless, of being all the time calm without ever being restless. When the yogi reaches the fourth or unchanging state, he finds his feeling free from dislikes and likes. The limiting effects of all of his past actions have been removed by yogic practice. I would say I fall somewhere between of being nearly all the time calm and once in a while restless, to be honest. A yogi cannot be sure of finding complete liberation just by acquiring the calm state. He must establish on that altar an ineffable peace, that the blissful cosmic presence. If the yogi is not able to stabilize his communion with the Absolute on the altar of everlasting calmness, he may have to undergo a few or many incarnations of divine contact in a state of unshakable calmness and self control before he attains final emancipation. And this next section is subtitled Esoteric Explanations of, quote, Many Births, unquote, in Light of Yoga Science. Lahiri Mayasaya, the first modern exponent of the deepest spiritual interpretations of the Bhagavad Gita, gives an esoteric meaning to the words, quote, many births, unquote, in this stanza. His explanation is as follows. When a man breathes out and cannot breathe in, he experiences the state of a great dissolution or death. Later, when the soul enters into another physical body, that transition is called rebirth. Similarly, when a man exhales and does not breathe in, that state is said to be one of partial dissolution. When he breathes again after perceiving the breathless state of partial dissolution, he is spoken of as being born again. As a yogi finds liberation after many great dissolutions, many deaths and rebirths, so he may also attain freedom by the practice of Kriya Yoga, by consciously experiencing death during breathlessness and rebirth during inhalation in the superconscious state. If the accomplished yogi can keep concentrated on the absolute bliss without attachment to material pleasures during a certain number of births and deaths, i.e., inhalations and exhalations in one or more incarnations in the natural course of evolution, he becomes emancipated. But the Kriya Yogi may hasten his evolution by the esoteric births and deaths, breathing and breathless states of Kriya Yoga. By repeated superconscious experience of these esoteric births and deaths, the Kriya Yogi becomes purged of sin, the karmic taint of material attachment, and is freed. In the science of Kriya Yoga, Lahiri Mayasaya has thus given to the world a short route to liberation. When the yogi in the highest ecstasy perceives his soul united to spirit and no longer identifies himself with the ever-changing dream inhalations and exhalations of the dream body, that devotee has received salvation. And yeah, the breath thing is major. Breath control is it's such important in the process of gaining into these kinds of spiritual states. The consciousness of breath or inhalation and exhalation gives rise to the consciousness of the body. Thus, the soul during the wakeful state is identified with the body and breath. It thereby becomes entangled in matter. During the state of deep slumber, for a while the soul remains oblivious of the body and the breath. Thus, it subconsciously perceives its joyous state. When the yogi learns superconsciously to contact his soul and to transcend his breath and body, he finds the infinite reflected in his being. All finer subconscious or superconscious experiences take place without the consciousness of breath. Therefore, when in ecstatic meditation, the yogi learns to remain in his soul without the mortal breath that causes rebirths, and when he can retain the unity with his breathless, God-united soul, when his consciousness re-enters the physically active breathing state, he is spoken of as one who has liberated himself. The consciousness of breath in the wakeful state makes people daily aware of a quote-unquote new birth. In sleep, in the breath-forgetting state, one experiences a counterfeit death. Hence, a man who regularly wakes up and sleeps experiences 365 rebirths and deaths in 1 year. In a lifetime of 100 years, he experiences 36,500 births and deaths. If a yogi, from his infancy to the fullness of his life, during his many births in wakefulness and his many deaths in slumber, can equally retain his unity with cosmic blessedness, remaining free from all attachment, then in that one lifetime of many short births and deaths, he may achieve complete liberation. In a case where there is a great amount of stored up bad karma, such a yogi may require several lives for full emancipation. Patanjali says, quote, the yogi who makes keen efforts without being impatient, he who possesses devotion, vital energy, recollection of his true self, discrimination, and calm persistence in deep meditation, achieves emancipation in a short time, unquote. Pedestrians in the path of yoga may take many lives to reach the goal, whilst fast spiritual travelers may arrive in one life. Verse 46. Quote, and we got 7 pages until the end of this chapter on which I'm going to end this. Quote, the yogi is deemed greater than body disciplining ascetics, greater even than the followers of the path of wisdom or the path of action. Be thou, O Arjuna, a yogi, unquote. Asceticism is a bypath because it teaches man to reach God indirectly by outer renunciation and physical discipline. The path of theoretical wisdom is also a bypath because it teaches the confusing way of academically reasoning about Him. The path of action is also a bypath because it teaches a circuitous way of reaching God through external good actions. The Lord Himself here extols the royal path of yoga as the highest of all spiritual paths, and the scientific yogi as greater than a follower of any other path. The real Kriya Yoga way, life force control, is not a bypath. It is a direct highway, the shortest route to divine realization. It teaches man to ascend heavenward by leading the ego, mind, and life force through the same spinal channel that was used when the soul originally descended in the body. And this subsection is called Spinal Route of Ascension is Universal Highway to be Traveled by All Souls. Quote, continuing, the spirit as soul has descended through the subtle astral cerebral spinal centers into the brain and the spinal plexuses and into the nervous system, the senses, and the rest of the body, and becomes entangled there as the pseudo-soul or ego in the body-identified state. The ego engages in further involvements in and with the objective world. The ego has to be made to ascend through the same spinal path until it realizes its true self as the soul, and the soul reunites with the spirit. Yoga points out that this spinal route is the one straight highway that all earth-descended mortal beings must follow in the final ascension to liberation. All of the paths, those that emphasize performance of bodily and mental self-discipline, or theoretical knowledge of the scriptures, the gaining of wisdom by discrimination, or the performance of all good actions, are auxiliary paths that somewhere join the highway of practical yoga that leads straight to liberation. The ascetic who is busy with disciplining the body, putting it through rigorous austerities, may attain a degree of control over the physical instrumentality, but merely practicing postures, enduring cold and heat, and not giving in to sorrow and pleasure without simultaneously concentrating on cosmic consciousness is only a roundabout pathway to gaining the mental control necessary for God communion. The yogi attains the communion with the Lord directly by withdrawing his consciousness from the senses and nervous systems, the spine and the brain, and uniting it with his God-knowing soul. Many devotees are so engrossed in following the precepts of external asceticism and renunciation that they forget that ecstasy with the infinite is the purpose of such self-discipline. Yeah, I mean, for real. If you're not getting something amazing out of it, what's the point? When the scriptural philosopher dissects words and thoughts with the scalpel of his reason, he may grow so fond of theoretical knowledge and of mentally separating wisdom into various segments that he may, quote unquote, dry up through lack of the experience of truth in divine ecstasy. Yeah, I would say that's a lot of people on the course of history. If a person spent his lifetime in analyzing the properties of water and in examining water from different sources all over the world, he would not thereby quench his thirst. A thirsty man, without fussing over the atomic constituencies, selects some good water, drinking it, he becomes satisfied. An exoteric jnana yogi, a follower of the path of discriminative reason, may read and analyze all the scriptures and still not slack his soul thirst, and it's still not slake his soul thirst. That's a weird word. A theoretical knowledge of scriptures often produces a conviction that one knows the truth when he actually does not know it. Indeed. Oh boy. Only by communing with God, the, quote, library of all knowledge, unquote, may one know all truths in their exactitude. Without wasting time in the theoretical understanding and misunderstanding of scriptures, that is why a wide gulf may exist between scripture readers and men of realization who are themselves embodiments of scriptural truths. Let me just pause for a quick second here. Be back in 10 seconds. I'll be done in like 5 minutes. Oh, okay, I'm back, and wife is home, and we have 5 pages left, so let's get this done. The Pharisees were willing to crucify Christ because they surmised fearfully that he was a threat to their authority, having actually perceived the truth that they knew only in theory. Lastly, the yogi, this is profound, this whole section. Lastly, the yogi is also deemed greater than the man of action, the missionary, the social worker, the man of goodwill who practices the, quote, golden rule, unquote, towards others. The teacher who tries to instruct others in the technique of God communion, all no doubt perform good actions. But unless they also devote themselves to the inner science by which they can know God through their own direct experience, they will remain without divine realization. That is why the yogi meditates and concentrates on the attainment of ecstasy. Until he achieves that state of inner attunement with God, he performs his duties, but does not divert himself with any outward activities at the cost of forgetting the Lord. The yogi teaches and serves others in the highest way by his inspiring life. Example ever speaks louder than words. Reform thyself, and thou wilt reform thousands. Forgetting God is the greatest sin. Communion with God is the highest virtue. Man, I can't agree with this more. A little study of scriptures with the continuous desire to practice the truths enjoined in them is desirable in the path of yoga. Renunciation of all entanglements in order to commune with God is also helpful. Performance of dutiful actions that satisfy one's own needs and that are serviceful and uplifting to others provides beneficial balance in the life of the yogi. The paths of renunciation and wisdom and action may be followed in two ways, externally and internally. The man who concentrates on external renunciation is an outer renunciant, but the tapasvin, who destroys all internal desires and attachments and who keeps his mind away from sense temptations, is a man of esoteric renunciation. And this next section is subtitled External and Internal Paths of Renunciation, Action, and Wisdom. The man who concentrates on external, Similarly, the external follower of the wisdom path, Jnana Yoga, is busy in solving scriptural problems and in analyzing word structures. The esoteric Jnanin, according to the Vedanta philosophy, is he who not only listens to the scriptural truths and perceives their meaning in his mind, but becomes one with them by complete assimilation. Therefore, the Vedantic way of spiritual realization is to listen to the scriptural truth, Shravanam, and then to perceive it, then to be one with it. I'm not going to read those other words. The man who performs good actions is the external karma yogi. He who practices yoga meditation performs the highest action. He is the esoteric karman, but he who performs or practices kriya yoga, the highest technique of contacting God, is the raja yoga, or the royal kriya yogi. He attains ascension and is thus among the highest yogis. This next section is subtitled Esoteric Meaning of Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Tapasya. Another interpretation of this stanza. Oh, hold on just a moment. Fucking real. Okay, I'm back. Let's see, where was I? Okay, during his earlier states of attempts at God union, the yogi has to perform various spiritual actions of proper breathing, life control, and fighting distractions with concentration. Therefore, he's spoken of as following the path of esoteric karma yoga. At this state, the yogi is identified with actions. He is karman. When the yogi is able to see the spiritual light as the kudastha or Christ center between the eyebrows and to withdraw his life force from the nervous systems of the five sense telephones, he enters the state of esoteric tapasya, ascetical renunciation. His mind, being disconnected from the senses, then exits in a state of esoteric renunciation. He is a tapasvin. When the yogi is further able to unite his mind with the wisdom and bliss of his soul, he is a follower of the esoteric Jnana Yoga. This is called the Jnanin state of the yogi. In the last high state, when the soul, free from all bodily and worldly consciousness, is united with the blessed cosmic spirit, the devotee is called the esoteric Raja Yogi. This state of final yoga, or union of soul and spirit, is the loftiest. He who attains it is the true yogi. He has reached higher spiritual planes than the one who has achieved only the state of tapasvan, karman, or jnananin. The real yogi knows God as the ever-existing, ever-conscious, ever-new bliss. He perceives all creation as God's dreams. The path of Kriya Yoga is distinctive and scientific because it teaches the exact method of withdrawing the mind from the senses by switching off the life force from the five sense telephones. Only when this interiorization is accomplished can the meditator enter the inner temple of God communion. In other words, the Kriya Yoga yogi follows a sure, definite method of leading not only his mind but his life force through the spinal channel to unite them with the soul. The highest ecstasy, he then unites his soul with spirit. Kriya Yoga, or the indirect reference to it in the scriptures as Kavali Pranayama, is the true pranayama in which the inhaling and exhaling breath has been transmuted into interiorized life force under the full control of the mind. By distilling prana from the breath and by neutralizing the life currents that control the breath, all the cells of the body are vitally recharged by the reinforced bodily life force and the cosmic life. The physical cells neither change nor decay. Kriya Yoga is a suitable practice for any sincere seeker of God who is freed from the serious acute illness and who observes in his daily life the cardinal moral precepts. This next subsection is titled Yoga, the Scientific Highway to the Infinite. The theologies of all great religions have one common foundation, the finding of God. But religious truth without practical realization is necessarily limited in its value. How can the blind lead the blind? Indeed, few men understand the Bhagavad Gita as its writer, Vyasa, understood its truths. Few men understood the words of Christ as he understood them. Vyasa, Christ, Babaji, and all other perfected masters perceived the same truth. They described it variously in different languages. In the study of the Bhagavad Gita and the New Testament, I have perceived their meanings as one. I have therefore been quoting the words of Christ to show their unity with the truths of the Gita. In order to understand fully the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible, the spiritual aspirant must learn to go into the state of ecstasy and commune with Vyasa and Christ through cosmic consciousness. As all colleges in the world teach the same principles of science which can be proven by application, so all true religious schools, if they followed yoga, would be aware that it is this one scientific highway to the infinite. That is why each man should become a God-united yogi. In this stanza of the Bhagavad Gita, the voice of God sounds a trumpet call to all spiritual aspirants, become yogis. All right, I think this is the last verse, verse 47, quote, "He who with devotion absorbs himself in me," Krishna, Christ consciousness, "with his soul immersed in me, him I regard among all classes of yogis as the most equilibrated," unquote. And the commentary continues, various methods and bypaths are termed yoga. Karma yoga, the path of good actions. Jnana yoga, the path of discrimination. Bhakti yoga, the path of prayer and devotion. Mantra yoga, the path of God union by chanting and incantations of seed sounds. Lela yoga, the path that teaches how to dissolve the ego in the infinite. And Hatha yoga, the path of bodily discipline. Raja yoga, specifically Kriya yoga, is the quintessence of all yoga paths, path especially favored by royal sages and great yogis in ancient India. Here the Lord has emphasized that the Raja yogi or Kriya yogi, who with devotion withdraws his life force and mind from the body, and who unites his ego with his soul, and his soul with the ever blessed spirit, and who can maintain constant ecstasy with the infinite equally during action and during meditation, is the highest of all yogis. Such great devotees do not remain, quote, locked up, unquote, always in ecstasy, refusing to take part in the refusing to take part in the drama of life created by the Lord. They perform their duties and their God-reminding actions with blissful consciousness, under divine direction. Being supremely united to God, such a yogi maintains the poise or equilibrium of yoga, divine union, equally in ecstatic meditation and in dutiful activity. The devotee who performs actions in a state of ecstasy, maintaining unbroken inner union with spirit both in meditation and in external activities, is the greatest of all yogis. He has attained an even higher state than the yogi who remains one with the Lord for years in Savikalpa Samadhi without performing any bodily actions. Kriya Yoga teaches the householder as well as the man of renunciation to commune with God as his first duty, and then to perform all proper physical, mental, moral, and spiritual duties with divine consciousness, directed by him alone. All right, so that looks like it's going to be the end here. I appreciate you guys joining me. This was a 3.5 hour read. Another chapter down. We're at page 756. I think we have only 250 something pages left to go in this book, believe it or not. I'm not 100% sure. Let me actually double check that. So we're on chapter 6. And let's see here. The last chapter is on page 1211. So yeah, we got some more. We definitely got some more. For sure. We're at 757. So yeah, it's about 400 something more pages. Still, that's not too bad. So either way, I appreciate you guys joining me here. And just to remind you, if you guys would like more information regarding Yogananda and his organization, let's see here, where did I put that? There it is. You guys can find it at yogananda.org. You can purchase the book I'm reading right now, which honestly I actually absolutely suggest you doing, because that's good just to have and to sit down and read, just to keep this kind of stuff, kind of jumbling around in your mind, because it does help. If you read a little bit of something good every single day, it kind of just refocuses your thought process into that kind of thing. And then of course there's the Self-Realization Fellowship, which is run by his organization, and they have all kinds of sermons and different kinds of stuff that you guys can check out. So outside of that, I very much appreciate you guys joining me today, and I'll probably be back in 3 or 4 days, if not next weekend, to do another big couple of rounds to get through this thing. Because what I've got coming up is going to be related, which is why I wanted to finish this. So again, thank you. Love all you. Peace to all of you. And until the next time, I will see you on the flip side.